America is the land of the free and the home of the brave. But the land that we love faces grave challenges. And America is not living up to its promise. Chaos reigns, at home and abroad. Elites in Washington have forgotten that they are supposed to serve us, the American people. We don't have to settle for this.
Everything we have to do with, look, if...
Despite the threats and challenges our country faces, as conservatives, we know and believe that America is still the greatest country on this planet. But if we don't stand up to defend all that is good about America and push back against the political establishment and cultural elites, America will not recover. That's why the next conservative administration will champion principles that can save America from the brink of disaster. Conservatives will restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. Dismantle the administrative state and restore self-governance to the American people. Defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. And secure our God-given individual rights to live freely. These goals get at the heart of the moral and foundational challenges America faces in this moment of history. And if we can fulfill these promises, America will remain the land of the free and the home of the brave. We have a small window of opportunity to act with courage and confidence, to rescue our nation from the radical left. We've done it before, and together, we can do it again. We know what we're fighting for. We are fighting for America's future.
Please welcome back to the stage Heritage Counselor and Spokesperson Genevieve Wood.
Welcome back. And welcome to those of you who are just now joining us. It's delightful to have you back with us. And the video you just saw, if you weren't here this morning, is outlining the conservative policy vision to unify the country, unify Americans, to get down to business with the next new administration. We talked this morning about dismantling the administrative state. That's number one on the charts. Number two, we talked about getting back to our nation's borders and our sovereignty. And this afternoon, we're going to talk about restoring the family and protecting children, and also securing our God-given rights to live freely. But it's first my pleasure to introduce a man who is really responsible for helping pull this vision together. Ever since he joined the Heritage Foundation at the end of 2021, he has known what time it is in the country, and he's made sure that everybody that works at Heritage has a watch, and we know what time it is too. His leadership of Heritage and also leadership of the conservative movement is really what today is about, is pulling together the conservative vision that can unify the country and get us back on track to save it. So before I welcome Dr. Kevin Roberts to the stage, and you welcome him, please take a look at the video on the screens.
Heritage Foundation president, somebody else doing an unbelievable job.
The head of the Heritage Foundation who smacked the whole idea of globalism.
He's bringing it back to levels it's never seen.
A top Christian leader in public policy and a champion for First Amendment freedoms.
He's my new favorite person, so give him, a legend, a round of applause.
Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kevin Roberts.
Make no mistake, this idea of human inequality that some people count and some people don't doesn't come from the media or the government or the elite or the left or even Planned Parenthood. It comes straight from hell.
The agenda that every single member of the administration needs to have is to compile a list of everything that's ever been proposed at the World Economic Forum and object to all of them wholesale.
The party of Bill Clinton wants to talk to us about decency? Decency! Like public schools secretly showing porn to young children? Spare us.
You might say, and the people come here stand up for, is liberal democracy. Well, it's laughable that you would, or anyone would describe Davos as protecting liberal democracy. With all due respect, nothing personal, but that's your part of the problem.
As we fight, as we charge hills, as we bear the burdens we have, that we always know for the United States of America, there's always more.
Please welcome Heritage President Dr. Kevin Roberts.
Thanks so much. Man, what a pleasure to see so many great American patriots out in the audience. How many of you are ready to very steadily, calmly, peacefully take our country back? Yeah, I figured that'd be the response, and obviously we have so many people who are tuning in now and will tune in coming days. Make no mistake, the whole purpose of gathering all of you here for Policy Fest, for making this broadcast worldwide, is to remind people that yes, especially after Saturday's tragedy and near tragedy with our former president, it is always darkest before dawn. But to quote our former wonderful First Lady Melania Trump from yesterday, dawn is here again, and we need to have smiles on our faces in spite of that tragedy, knowing that we have the resolve, we have the plan, and we also have the support of the American people to restore this country's greatness once again. Thanks for being part of it. Friends in the media, and I mean that with only a little bit of sarcasm, have spent a little bit of ink, rightly, talking about the conservative movement's plans for taking back this country. And we welcome that conversation because, as is evidenced over the last few days, the more we talk about policy, the more we talk about ideas, the more we welcome the conversation about the overreach of the federal government and the centralization of power, especially in Washington, D.C., the more our friends in the media, and now I do mean that genuinely, the more our friends in the media will recognize that the vast majority of American people understand it is time to get their sovereignty back against the federal government that frankly has run roughshod over them for too long. Sometimes people ask me, well, Kevin, you know, what really is the purpose of something like Project 2025? Is it X or Y or Z? And what's the difference between the presidential campaign or the RNC platform? And my response would be the response that any of us who've been active in the conservative movement over the last half century would say, which is that it actually isn't about the project itself. The label's almost immaterial. The project is a representation of what a majority of Americans feel and believe and who have been begging for what they've been begging for, which is a plan for how you do all of these things that are the themes of this great gathering. Not just dismantling the administrative state for the sake of some political science reason, but the real purpose to restore self-governance to the American people so that they can, according to their choice, their customs, their habits, build their families, live in their communities, go about their lives and their businesses and their jobs, as we like to say, living the good life. You might say that the real purpose of this huge, broad-scale effort, unprecedented in the history of the conservative movement, isn't so much about policy per se, as it is to remind people, elites in Washington, New York, the left coast, Brussels, that time has come to stop forgetting about forgotten Americans. People who for too long have seen their businesses shuttered. People who for too long have seen their communities deteriorate. People in the Rust Belt who have seen the ravages of misguided policies that place an emphasis on elite interests and not an emphasis on the interests of the everyday American. Permit me an example that's personal. I was partly raised by my grandfather. I wrote about him recently in a First Things article, and we'll be writing about him more this year because I think he really personifies what's going on here. You have someone in your family, no doubt, who personifies this point, which I think makes my Pawpaw Pete really special. He had very little formal education. His first native language was Cajun French. He was a man's man. He was a man of great faith. He's a man who loved this country, served as a U.S. Marine in World War II. And while being a man's man, he also had this really special, tender spot for the women in his life, for his kids and his grandkids, and especially for this country. He was a lifelong Democrat, but he loved Ronald Reagan. And I know if he were alive today, he would love Donald J. Trump. But why? Is it President Trump's policy record on the border? Sure. Is it his policy record across many policy areas? Sure, there's great agreement there between people like my grandfather and President Trump. But it's actually something deeper, and that's the point that I'm driving at here for you and your families, and obviously speaking on behalf of all of us who've been part of this great project. And it is that for once in modern American history, we have a plan among a unified movement to speak on behalf of the everyday American, the forgotten American, not just someone like him from the Deep South, not even just people who have seen their communities in the Rust Belt deteriorate and diminish, but for new members of our coalition, working class, multi-ethnic coalition that for the first time in modern American history really does threaten the centralized power of the American left. The reason progressive Democrats hate these ideas so much is because they are a threat to their power. And so let us, while being very clear about the intentions of our language, also state very clearly that while there are many reasons to wake up today in the United States of America and be discouraged, to be despairing, to worry, that there are tens of millions of Americans who agree with us. We may not agree on every little detail. That's not the point. In the spirit of Reagan, in the spirit of President Trump, in the spirit of so many leaders, the point is to work together on that 80, 90, 95% of overlap and go fight like heck, steadily, with resolve, with great peacefulness, and show the radical left that once and for all we are controlling this country again. And so, thank you. And yes, that does mean that we have to get about the business of not just policy work and political work, not just about the business of electing good men and women to office, but we have to be about the business of restoring America in our communities, in our families, in our churches, our professional associations, our bowling leagues, our Little League baseball teams. You see, that's really where America is. New York and Washington and the left coast want us focused on politics all the time. But the lesson of the last few days and the motivation of something like Project 2025, ironically, is to make Washington a heck of a lot less important in our lives so that we can go about our own lives the way we would like. And so, this entire conference, our work at Heritage for the rest of the year, is dedicated not just to all of you and to that huge majority of Americans, that huge group that we might call forgotten Americans, but personified by the fallen hero from Saturday, Corey Comparator, whom we would honor given the tragedy that took his life. But I would dare say, not having met Corey, but feeling like I know him, that he personifies what this movement is about. A man who went to church every Sunday, a man who literally gave his life protecting his family, a man who is doing something that any of us from the far left to the far right should think we should be able to do at any point in this country and not be threatened with violence, and that's attend the political rally of our choice. But you see, Corey in his service as a firefighter, his witness as a husband, as a man of God, is someone who represents the vast, vast, vast majority of the American people. And so I'll ask you, for the rest of this week, for the rest of this year, particularly when we're in moments when we're talking to family and friends who might have a different political perspective than us, to remind them it's not even so much about the policies themselves as it is about the spirit that Corey personified, which is to live our lives well, in great virtue, but also fearlessly, on behalf of not just in our faith above, but on our faith that this country, the United States, is still the greatest experiment in human freedom in history, and in spite of its warts, and in spite of its challenges, we now finally, after a long interlude, have leaders like President Trump and many other men and women, and a plan that will actually do honor to Corey's sacrifice. God bless you as we begin this process of taking back this great country. Thanks for being part of it.
Thank you, sir. You all can see why we love working under the leadership of Dr. Kevin Roberts at the Heritage Foundation. He has been awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, we've talked a lot today about a number of issues, but I know one that is so critical to everybody in this room and across the country is the family. And nothing has come under more attack in the last few years than the family and our children. So one of the four pillars that we talked about today that we wanted to delve into was restoring the family to its rightful place in society and protecting our children. And to lead that conversation is a woman I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. She has got her new podcast coming out on The Blaze, debuting this next week. You can also download it on YouTube. Liz Wheeler is coming out, and she will be introducing the other panelists. Come on out, Liz.
Marriage,
Actually,
family, work, church.
But we're going to play this video first.
These institutions are the building blocks of a healthy society. Today, they are crumbling. Marriage rates are at an all-time low. Family no longer looks like a married mom and dad and their children. 40% of babies are born to an unwed mother, including more than 70% of Black children. 1 in 4 kids grow up without a father figure in the home. Statistics show these kids are more likely to experience poverty, abuse drugs, or commit crimes. Instead of helping struggling families, government programs attack marriage and work. Why bother to get a job when the taxpayers can just take care of you? Church attendance is at a record low, and the left is targeting churches and charities that reject woke progressive ideology. Instead of focusing on education, schools are pushing critical race theory and championing LGBTQ lifestyles. American kids fall far below their international peers in reading and math scores. But what do the progressive elites care about? Pronouns and pride flags. None of this is okay. If current trends continue, we are heading towards social implosion. We must restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. We know what we are fighting for. We are fighting for America's future.
Thank you all for having me here. Dr. Roberts, this is an incredible event. Genevieve, thank you for the introduction. And thanks to all of you for coming here. We are fighting for the things that we hold dear. And it's really my privilege to be up here. It's always my privilege to be a part of Heritage events. But in particular today, you may feel this the same way that I do. We recently witnessed President Trump being the target of an assassination attempt because he represents the values that we hold dear, that we are here discussing and fighting for today, which elevates my gratitude for being able to have these discussions and fight particularly for families and children, which is what we're doing today. We are the first generation of conservatives who recognize the paramount importance of the culture wars. This is something that we should not take lightly, something we should not take for granted. It's become crystal clear to me how important these cultural hot-button, sometimes uncomfortable topics are since becoming a mother myself 3.5 years ago. And it was crystallized to me even further during my latest research project. I was researching what exactly is behind this woke effort in our schools and in our medical institutions and our culture in general. This isn't a coincidence. It's a concerted effort. Who is behind it? And I was reading Marxist literature to figure out what their strategy was. And I was reading the works of Antonio Gramsci, who was an Italian Marxist, and he was the one who proposed this idea of cultural hegemony, which is if you want to topple a free nation, then you don't topple it from the government, you topple it from the culture first by taking over the cultural institutions. And we have seen this in our country. We have seen the very institutions that Gramsci mentioned, the media, the education system, family, marriage, gender, children, one after the other, systemically assaulted since the works of Antonio Gramsci were translated into English from Italian by a man named Joseph Buttigieg. You might recognize that name because Joseph Buttigieg is the father of Pete Buttigieg. And these these cultural assaults in our nation have become more and more prevalent, and yet we are not without hope, which is why I'm so honored to introduce to you a panel of experts who know how to fight back against this, not just culturally, but legally, to once and for all put a stop to this assault on the institutions which form the bulwark of a free society. So I'm going to introduce to you Roger Severino, Sarah Parshall-Perry, and Daniel Cochran. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause. Roger is the Vice President of Domestic Policy here at the Heritage Foundation, and previously he was the Director of the Office for Civil Rights at HHS under Trump. So his qualifications to speak on this topic speak for himself. Daniel Cochran on the end here is a Senior Research Associate at the Tech Policy Center here at Heritage Foundation, and Sarah Parshall-Perry is a Senior Legal Fellow here at the Heritage Foundation and former Senior Counsel to the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education. So it is my honor. Thank you guys for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Sarah, I want to start with you because we were having meetings discussing this panel beforehand to make it as best as we possibly can, and you said something to me that struck me, something that when I'm traveling the country and talking to people, it's something they often ask, and that is, they ask me, are you optimistic about the future? And one of the points that you make, before we get into the legal weeds about how we bring this about, is you said that parents, when they're fighting against the forces of gender ideology or critical race theory, they should have hope because there are legal remedies for them. Can you expound on that?
Yeah, I think so much of what we're seeing right now in the culture is sort of anti-parent and simultaneously anti-child. But there's good reason to have hope. We've done a lot of research and writing on the constitutionality of laws that are being put in place at the state level to restrict, for example, gender-affirming care for minor individuals under the age of 18. Think about it. These individuals can't buy tobacco. They can't drink alcohol. They can't vote. They can't serve in the U.S. military. But we are suddenly of the mind, culturally, that these individuals can consent to, for example, double mastectomies at the age of 13 when they might not even be conceiving of down the road wanting to nurse their first child. So there are legal remedies, not only through civil rights law, but through constitutional law as well. And I think it's incumbent upon the conservative movement to take those remedies and apply them the right way. One of the reasons I decided to follow a path in law as opposed to just a path in policy was that the best policy in the world, if it is not undergirded by strong law, is ultimately going to fail in the end.
Then I think that's an experience a lot of parents have had. You can gather community around you, but if it is not something that is protected in law, then your children are still at risk. Daniel, I want to talk to you a little bit about where this assault is coming from, and not the ideological point, but the access point to children, and that is, of course, technology. I think all of our best friend and worst enemy here, there's a lot of debate in conservative circles about what's the best way to handle this, but could you speak to how the indoctrination of children is happening through big tech and what some of our policy recourses are in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you're absolutely right, Liz. We can't talk about the degradation of American culture without recognizing that the companies that shape technology are part and parcel of the problem. And let me just talk about one of the worst actors, and that is TikTok. Many of you probably have heard of TikTok. Many of you, hopefully, you have kids who aren't on TikTok, but if your kids are on TikTok, get them off of TikTok. Because companies like TikTok, platforms like TikTok, they have designed their services to addict kids to their platforms. Their algorithms are designed to keep kids hooked. And it's not just the fact that kids are being sucked into these digital services. Over and over again, what we're finding is that they're being exposed to the most toxic, dangerous content. And I want to focus on one category of content in particular that poses an existential threat to our kids and our culture, and that is pornography. Overwhelmingly, the average age of pornography has dropped. So the average age now, it's around 13 years old. The ability to access pornography has only increased with the proliferation of social media. So something like 38% of kids are reporting that they're watching graphic pornography on social media. About 42% are watching pornography on adult platforms, so digital technologies that are spreading this content. And I just want to make a final point, which is that this has a long-term impact on family formation. When you have young people that are exposed to this graphic, violent, and addictive content at an early age, it disables their ability to be future parents, future husbands and fathers. This is harming family formation in a way that I think is unprecedented, and this is just one of many reasons why we need to talk about the technological aspect of our sort of cultural degradation here.
Well, let me follow up before we move on to the bigger picture here. What is the solution to that? We can look at it and we can say, okay, TikTok's a problem, pornography is a problem. How do we solve it?
So I think the first question we have to ask is who's doing the shaping, and overwhelmingly, 3 platforms control or dominate where kids are spending their time. That's TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. So essentially, 3 platforms, when we're talking about social media, make up about an average, so average child is spending about 4.8 hours a day on social media, and of that, it's estimated that those 3 platforms make up about 4.3 hours. So those institutions are shaping your kids. And the only way to address that, and this is just the first step, is reining in their power. So the first thing we have to do is say, look, parents need a say before their kids are able to access these platforms. And by the way, we should recognize what these platforms are. They're like tobacco. They're like addictive drugs. They actually have. There are studies that show that social media has similar effects to actual drugs, and we've said for decades that that warrants a legislative response. The same is true here. So one, I think, very important approach, one simple solution that states and the federal government should focus on is age verification. Age verification for social media, age verification for dangerous sites that affect our kids. And we can dig deeper into that, but that's one solution that's on the table.
And Roger, let me ask you, so if we zoom out from these things, education and big tech, these are institutions that should serve as a support system for the ultimate institution of a free society, that is family, built on marriage. And yet in our country, we are experiencing a crisis of marriage. Could you talk to us about, first of all, why that is? Why are marriage rates going down? Is this purely cultural? Is there a legal aspect to it? And then talk to us a little bit about, yes, what we can do culturally, but from a legislative or a policy standpoint, how do we remedy that?
Yeah. Well, it's a multifaceted problem. People are not getting married like they used to. They're not having kids like they used to. And it ultimately comes down to lack of hope and optimism. And that's a cultural question, but government had a big role to play as well. It didn't come from nowhere that even during the Jim Crow era, the black family was intact. Right? Even under grinding discrimination, the black family was intact. When the Great Society and the welfare programs that started punishing marriage came about, it devastated the black community, where 70% of kids born in black households don't know their fathers. And that has downstream effects on down the line, on education outcomes, on job prospects, crime rates. All sorts of social dysfunction happens when government moves in to attack the family with a welfare system that says fathers are optional, and in fact, you're going to be punished if you get married because your benefits are going to be taken away. So we have to move away from this notion that government is actually punishing marriage. Of our dozens of welfare programs is first. Second, to restore some of that optimism and dynamism, get the government out of the way. Let families form. Let parents have the right to raise their kids as they want. Make sure we have economic opportunity so that people don't have to worry so much about, well, if I have a child, how am I going to pay for college and schooling? Of course, our schools have to be fixed, so we need school choice so that parents have the ability to say, I'm going to raise my child according to my values, so the state doesn't just take them and snatch them away. And finally, we're at 1.6 fertility rate. That means we need to be at 2.1 to at least replace ourselves, quite literally replace ourselves as a people. And our nation is a cradle, right? It's our idea. It's also a place. That's why we need secure borders. But it's also a people. And we're born into the American family. And that's special. And the problem is we're losing that optimism. And there is a role to play for government to see if we could say, look, we need to put the family back into the center of American life.
So one thing that one thing that you mentioned really intrigues me because it is a spicy topic, and that is the welfare reform. So if you identify that the breakdown of the American family, particularly the breakdown of the Black American family, started with a burgeoning welfare system, what specific policy reforms should we do and can we do? Should this be at a state level, a federal level? How is this done?
Well, there are dozens of federal welfare programs, and the states piggyback on them. We need work requirements on all of them, right? It is a myth to say that if you have a work requirement that suddenly you're going to leave people behind. We know from actual practice, you impose a work requirement, people work. People who are able-bodied are not tempted to be in the, instead of the safety net, it's a safety hammock, right? You're going to be taken care of. The government is going to be, Uncle Sam is your father, is your husband. You don't need anybody else. You don't need to work, right? You put a work requirement that's good for human dignity. If you're able-bodied and you could do it, work. And people respond to those incentives. And you cannot punish people and say, if you are a single mother on Section 8 housing, you're going to lose $10,000 if you get married. I used to do civil rights enforcement and sexual harassment in particular, and there were single mothers, often Black, that were being predated by supervisors in sexual harassment. No father figure there for the kids because of our welfare policies that aim to destroy the family. And so we got to get rid of these marriage penalties in all the programs, every single one.
Which you would think would be popular across the board. If you take maybe the politicians out of the equation here. Sarah, let me ask you about Title IX. Because when we're talking about hope and optimism, we're talking about raising people to feel that they want to get married, they want to have children, they want to build these families, this bulwark of our society. It's hard for them to do that if they've spent years in a school system that has been indoctrinating them into the opposite, particularly into perverted ideologies like gender ideology. And you say that with recent changes that the Biden administration has made to Title IX, this is now in every school in the country. Can you talk about that and talk about how we get rid of it?
Yeah, I think you start with the original premise, where we are now, and a recognition of the fact that educators, to a large extent, are no longer educating, but indoctrinating. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to every rule, and there are good educators as well, but we have teachers' unions that have an outsized influence in making sure that those particular education pet policy agenda items, including critical race theory and LGBTQIA-centric curriculum, and illustrated porn in classroom libraries, and drag queens for story hours. These are all platform planks for the AFT and the NEA. They are not looking out for the welfare of our children, so we have to take that welfare back ourselves. One of the biggest things that we're seeing in education right now is a massive change to a 52-year-old civil rights law called Title IX of the Education Amendments. Now, the sexual revolution didn't give us many good things, but one of the things that we did get was Title IX, which guaranteed educational equality for men and women. Remember, women up to a certain point into the 70s were not allowed into graduate schools. They were not allowed into certain colleges. They were not allowed to play scholastic sports. Taking that notion of equality, which has been around now for 52 years. Women have enjoyed many opportunities, myself included, and my daughter, who was going to college on a volleyball scholarship, has benefited from Title IX. To take the word sex, when it was enacted in 1972, and expand it to include gender identity or expression, takes the entire notion of equality and turns it upside down. Now what you've done is you've created special pet classes of individuals who gain super protection. So now is a girl's interest in bodily safety and privacy as important as a biological boy's who suddenly wakes up one day as an opportunistic 16-year-old and says, I think today I'm going to use the girls' bathroom. And when those two claims collide, where does the federal government come down on whose claim wins? So that's what we're seeing right now in Title IX. It will be in every federally funded school in the country, which is the majority of them, as of August 1st of this year. It is $1 indirectly or directly of federal funding coming from the government. So if you take a student on a Pell Grant or a reduced lunch program or a student loan, you're subject to Title IX. What we've seen now is 26 states that have sued the Biden administration and the Department of Education and said, we are not going to follow this in our state. It is illegal, and we are going to stand up. In 16 of those states, we've already seen a victory, and it's been completely enjoined. We have no doubt this is headed toward the Supreme Court, but until then, there are some very smart people and some very good litigators who are working as fast as they can to get this rule rolled back. So that is yet another reason to be hopeful.
And talk to me about the legislative aspect, too, because I hear you talking about the judicial aspect, and I fear, and I think we've observed this in some cases, especially with executive action, when a president of one party is in, he signs an executive action, a president of another party is elected next, he rescinds it, and it just kind of ping-pongs back and forth. Is this a matter for the federal legislature to define, not that they have the moral right to redefine the word sex to begin with, but legally, is this a matter for the legislature to define once and for all what the definition of that word is?
Well, I think the first thing we need to see if there is a new president in the White House in November is an executive order rescinding all of the Title IX guidance that we have seen from this administration. That is step one. And then the next step is going to be ultimately saying our interpretation is going to be that sex means exactly what Congress intended in 1972, male and female. And the Supreme Court has never equated sex with gender identity. And there may be some of you out there thinking, but what about the Bostock versus Clayton County decision? Gorsuch actually began that opinion by saying, we begin with the understanding that as Congress intended, sex means male and female. So the executive can play a role, the judiciary is playing a role currently in enjoining all of these state law applications of Title IX, and then on top of it, we've got the legislative bodies, and at the federal level, it is perfectly within Congress's purview to pass a law saying, we are interpreting sex as male and female, and we are going to revoke, overturn previous legislation that indicates anything else.
And Daniel, let me ask you, in a similar vein here, when we're talking about the three parts of our government, executive, judicial, and legislative, what is the best way policy-wise to go about some of the prescriptions that you were describing before? These age limits on graphic pornography websites, perhaps even on social media. We've seen in Texas, we've seen battles between the state and the porn companies that don't want to enact these age limits or these age verification on their websites. What is the way if we say, okay, we have a coalition, this is what we want to do, how do we get it done?
So I think it's an all of the above strategy. And I think what it requires is both the federal government, it requires Congress, it requires the states, hopefully also the administration. And so I'll start with the sort of federal level. On the federal level, there are several pieces of legislation that would make a meaningful dent in this problem and protecting our kids. One is called the Kids Online Safety Act. Among other things, this legislation would impose a duty of care on large social media companies to say, look, you have to consider kids' safety and how you design your products. You can't sell a product to kids. You can't appeal to kids directly and intentionally, knowing that your product is designed to addict them, to ensnare them, and to cause harm, which we know now, not just from third-party research, but from these companies' own internal leaks, including at Instagram, that the companies have known for years the impacts that their platforms have. So on the federal level, I think it's legislation. But at the same time, the states, as laboratories of democracy, they need to be involved. And Texas, I'm glad, Liz, you brought up Texas. I think that's an excellent example. So Texas enacted a law that said, look, if you're an adult site, you can't allow minors to have access to it, and you have to perform reasonable age verification. I just want to note that for decades, states around the country have said the same thing about brick-and-mortar adult venues, right? So if you're a strip club or you're an adult video store, a lot of states require, require, and in fact, a lot of localities require that you verify the age of your customers before allowing them to even enter the premises. It's a travesty that we aren't requiring the same thing of digital platforms that are far more pervasive and far more harmful. So Texas took the right, Texas is a great model. Like, they took a step in requiring age verification for those sites. And it was challenged, of course, by the porn industry. However, the law was upheld by the Fifth Circuit. It's now, there's some procedural questions. The Supreme Court accepted a question over what standard should be used in the lower courts to evaluate these laws. But I'm hopeful that both the states and the federal government working together can really, I think, push the needle in the right direction when we're talking about the most egregious harms.
Yeah, and I think that I'm interested in watching that case play out. I think a lot of people are, because Texas is taking a lead on that. Roger, I want to go back to the welfare topic that you mentioned before, because I think that it is sometimes an unpopular topic to talk about any kind of welfare reform. People, and this is perhaps just human nature, people get very worried, oh, am I going to lose my benefits? I rely on this. This is how I support my family. Can you paint us a picture, though, of what it's going to look like in our lifetime if we don't enact some of these reforms, particularly as it relates to the population crisis? You mentioned that, and I think that it's pertinent to mention this because we are going to experience, well, a crisis if we don't replace ourselves. It will be a population that's older, that requires care, that's more expensive, and not enough younger people to drive the economy and to support them. What does this look like, and when would it happen if we don't make these changes?
Yeah. So our welfare system is based on the notion that for those people who could be left behind through no fault of their own, we're going to extend a helping hand, right? It comes from a place of deep compassion. And that was based on the ability of working younger people to be able to contribute to those who, A, cannot work, or are older, or widows. I mean, that's what motivated a lot of our welfare state. It was never intended or designed to be a replacement for work for people who are able-bodied. It was never designed to be a replacement for mothers and fathers, right, where people have a choice. Do I marry this man, if you're a woman, or do I marry Uncle Sam, who could provide for me and, in fact, will penalize me if I get married? That affects the birth rates. So here's a couple statistics. If you are an unborn child, the safest place to be is in the womb of a married woman. And that's impacted by the fact that if the father of the child has no real commitment to be there to raise the child for the next 18 years, a woman in that circumstance will think, you know what, maybe this is not going to be something I'm going to do, and will abort at a much higher rate. 86% of abortions happen to women who are not married. So that lack of certainty, that optimism I was talking about earlier, affects people's choices that trickle all the way down to the point where, as a society, we're at a point where, since we're not marrying and we're not having as many children as we used to, we are quite literally disappearing. And just try to imagine, it takes some moral imagination to think, when you go to the convention and you're going to see just tens of thousands of people all crowded, imagine if, you know, a couple generations from now, you are not able to fill that stadium literally. And then another generation after, it's half of that. And another generation, half of that. Our Constitution was founded to pass on the blessings of liberty to our posterity, right? What we conserve as conservatives are our ideals, et cetera. But we need people to pass that on. And the natural fundamental unit is the family. And that's how we pass it on organically. And government was part of the problem that got us in this mess. We also have to make sure that we have the cultural message that every child is a blessing and every child contributes to everybody else. And the more children we have, the more we can actually have that optimistic vision, as well as help those in need that cannot help themselves.
The whole thing strikes me as a hybrid between policy and culture, which, as I said at the opening, it's what gives me optimism in this generation of conservatives, because for the first time, I feel like we really have a grip that the two don't compete, but the two have to go hand in hand to solve these problems. Sarah, I want to ask you about parental rights law when it comes not just to education, but the new front in the battle over gender ideology is actually the medical system. In healthcare, children are being given quote unquote rights by the left to make decisions, life-altering decisions, as a result of the gender ideology that they were indoctrinated into, and parents aren't given any dominion over their children. Do parents have legal recourse here? What do we do to solve this from a policy perspective?
Well, first of all, some statistics that are pretty jarring. 16 states, for example, have what are called sanctuary laws, which means that if your minor child flees the state to pursue gender-affirming care, and I'm using air quotes here, that child can be hidden from custodial parents in another state, which of course is patently unconstitutional, but the problem is that you need a parent who's experienced the pain of a runaway child, who has undergone gender affirmation surgery before they can actually bring a lawsuit against it. There are states, 3 of them in particular, that are now denying custody rights to separated parents who question their child's gender identity or expression, and will pick the parent that buys in whole cloth to a child's expression of gender identity. My 12-year-old son, who is on the autism spectrum, believed he was a firefighter, but you best believe I did not entertain that particular manifestation of his internal belief. We have seen so many expressions of the child being given the sort of premier authority over their lives, when in fact, for the better part of 50 years, the Supreme Court has recognized the immaturity and the emotional lability and the sort of long-standing inability of children to make life-altering decisions, whether it's in criminal law or civil law. But here we are in the medical context, and we have sort of a self-reinforcing confirmation loop. And it goes very much to what we've heard from Roger and Daniel at this point, because we're hearing in school first these particular curricular ideas, gender expansive. Children are being taught in preschool and beyond that gender is on a spectrum, that it is sort of fungible. And we've heard horror stories, and I've written on some of these horror stories about teachers and administrators going through an actual active social transition process with a child. Are you sure that's what your name is? Are you sure that's what your gender is? Would you like to borrow from our transition closet? These are real stories happening in real American classrooms. The problem is then their friends feed into this confirmation loop, and then what they see on things like TikTok and on social media platforms reinforce this confirmation loop. So they're hearing it from educators, they're hearing it from friends, they're hearing it from celebrities, and then of course the next logical step is medicalization. So then we see these children who are getting nothing more than 45 minutes of one telehealth counseling session before they are put on puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones. These drugs are drugs used to chemically castrate sex offenders. They leave lifelong consequences. None of it is reversible. And the CAS report that maybe some of you have heard of that just came out of England about 3 months ago was devastating for gender medicine in Europe. Unfortunately, here in the United States, we're not getting the memo. And so while Scotland, England, Norway, Ireland, Sweden have all backed off their approach to affirm early, affirm often, what we're seeing in the United States is whatever Johnny feels that day is going to govern how he is for the rest of his life. Children are bound to everything from rules on curfew, to allowances, to education, to friend groups, and yet now all of a sudden we're deciding that though they're incapable of making all of these short-term decisions, they are suddenly capable of committing themselves to the lifelong expression of a gender identity that will come with medical complications, chemical castration, and an increase of lifelong effects, everything from osteoporosis to bone density defects to liver cancer, and more. We have to take back as parents our authority, our God-given right to parent our children even when it's tough, and to say no to them. And unfortunately, a lot of the culture is not saying no to kids. A lot of the culture is facilitating their internal subjective mythical belief system, and we have to put guardrails in place, whether it is through family formation, whether it's through tech policy, whether it's through education, but primarily at home. Because if they're not going to hear the truth from us, you can believe they won't hear it anywhere else in the culture.
Yeah, and
Amen.
You could hope it will take maybe an NFL kicker to give a commencement address to present options to young people that maybe there are options available. And here's one thing. Motherhood itself has been denigrated so much. It is so countercultural now to actually say, you know what, motherhood is good. Our culture says you must put that aside and fatherhood is good. Put it all aside, and then maybe as a cherry on top, you could say, yes, I've added this to a checklist. Raising kids it should be central. It should be praised. And that in no way lowers anybody else by saying motherhood and fatherhood is so important to our society. And it doesn't take away from anybody, it's just a net good, but it is so countercultural to actually even take that position.
It is, and that leads into my next question for you, because when you make a cultural change, there are some cultural shifts that seem to happen quickly. Most cultural shifts, the seeds have been planted for decades before, the fruit, good or bad, comes to fruition here. Talk to me a little bit about policy changes in the vein of things that we've heard out of Hungary, where they say if you have 4 children, you never have to pay income tax on money that you have earned to provide for your family. Is that effective? Should we be exploring policies like that here to enact a quicker cultural change than waiting, 1, 2, 3 generations to kind of retrain people on how to think about family and marriage and motherhood and fatherhood?
Yeah. If you want a preview of where things are headed, look at South Korea, look at Japan. If you think that's a good vision, then you would think there's nothing to worry about. But I think it is a dystopian vision, and that's why those governments are on an emergency basis saying there's a serious problem because they are disappearing as a culture, as societies. That's a preview. So take a look at the social crisis that's happening there to get a sense of where things are headed. So Hungary is one example of a country that's dedicated a tremendous amount of money and effort to try to reverse that decline with some limited success. There has not been yet a silver bullet. All these other countries are trying it because every developed country is well below replacement except for Israel, but they have a unique historical circumstance. They do have strong faith culture as well, right? So if we're denigrating faith and people of faith in particular, that's going to hurt us when it comes to family formation. In terms of particular policies that require some sort of outlays, we have to be looking at every option to see what can be the best that works. We already have a child tax credit that is quite popular to help support families. We have to look at to see, okay, what can be done to do it in a way that does these principles: work, marriage, and children. And then education as well, so you could keep them and raise them according to your values. Are we willing to invest in those Americans that invest in this country's future? Are we going to invest in them because they're investing into our prosperity? I have 6 kids. They are the joy of my life. And yeah, it takes work, but the blessings overflow. So we need to change the moral imagination so we could say that, you know what, this option is a good option for people, and it will pay off consequences that last for generations, because our country depends not just on our ideals, not just on our resources, but our people as well.
I thought you looked awfully relaxed up here with 6 kids at home. This is your vacation time. Daniel, my prompt to you is one word: TikTok. Ban it? Not ban it? What do we do about this problem, especially because it's not entirely American-owned?
No, absolutely. But I wanted to touch on something Roger said, which is how our society has come to view family, which is linked to this idea of the self, right? So everything is oriented around sort of this individualism, this idea that what I want, I can create my own reality, and what I want overrides sort of the interests of others, right? So there's the idea of self-sacrifice has essentially been sidelined, and I think that social media in particular has has really formed this, it played a significant role in forming this plastic culture. So if we're thinking about what does social media reward in us, it rewards essentially a reality tailored to our desires. And if you think about, so there's a study from the University of North Carolina that looked at how social media may be rewiring kids' brains, right? So it's thinking about the sort of reward, how the brain essentially rewards different behaviors. And it's essentially rewiring the brain to prioritize sort of instantaneous gratification, short attention spans, and things that are shocking. So think about what that means in the long term. I mean, obviously we know the effects on kids' mental health, but if we're sort of looking at this for 10, 20 years, what this means is that kids, the next generation of would-be parents, are completely ill-equipped. They lack the virtues necessary for family formation. They have a total lack of impulse control. Right? They're unsuited to be fathers and mothers. And I think that this goes to also what Sarah was saying about gender ideology. Where is this spreading the most? It's spreading on platforms like TikTok. And I want to just say, it's notable that the groups that are spreading gender ideology go out of their way to say how important social media is to them. In fact, if you notice, and this is interesting because I do a lot of work on the states on age verification, as we mentioned. Guess who, other than the tech companies that, of course, almost always oppose age verification, who else is opposing it? It's the radical gender ideology groups. Why? Because they know that this platform is the place where they can identify and groom kids. Okay, this is the tool of choice for them. And so to your point about TikTok, TikTok's a great example. What do we do about it? Well, there's sort of two elements. TikTok is both a threat to kids for all the reasons we've talked about, but it's also a national security threat. And so we favor banning it. Congress didn't go that far in their current bill. What they said is, look, you got to have ByteDance divest, so you can't have a foreign entity controlling one of the most important communications platforms, frankly, in the country. And that's a good first step, and that kind of gets at the national security angle. But longer term, we need sort of a fulsome solution that addresses the larger harms of social media, not just on TikTok, but on all these other platforms as well. And I'll add one more thing, which is we need to change the principles for how these companies are looking at their products, right? When you design a product for kids, you need to design it with privacy in mind, and you need to design it with the best interest of the child. That's the long-term fix, I think, for some of these problems.
And that fits within our constitutional framework of what state legislatures, but also the federal legislatures are allowed to do. Make no mistake, and don't believe the propaganda from the left. Sarah, the proverbial first day of the next Trump administration, you have one policy you want him to enact on that day. What is it?
First, he revokes all of the guidance on sexual orientation and gender identity. And the first executive order that he's going to revoke is Executive Order 13988. That was enacted on January 20th of 2021. His first executive act in office. Joe Biden was to expand the definition of sex to include gender identity in every federal law and regulation impacted, enforced by, interpreted, or applied by every federal agency in the country. And from that first pebble, we see an avalanche of gender identitarianism and orthodoxy in every system in America, whether it is healthcare, whether it is technology, whether it is education. That gets revoked, and all of the other pieces start to fall into place. That is the primary responsibility, I think, of the next administration, is to make sure that they don't sacrifice children on the altar of woke progressivism. President Biden said once that they are, quote, all of our children. Well, I have a set of stretch marks that indicates otherwise. So if we don't take back our individual power as parents, if we don't stand up and say, I don't care about hurt feelings, we're going to talk reality, we're going to talk science, we're going to talk about common sense, and we're going to talk about you waiting until after you've gotten the therapy, the mental health care that you need, and after you get to be an adult. At that point, we can have another conversation. We are not seeing the grown-ups in the room. We have ceded all of the power in the American educational institution, in the American medical institution, in technology, essentially to minor children who are spending so much time being indoctrinated by the individuals coming from Washington, D.C. and trickling through the cultural elitism of the left and right coast, that we are not able to stand up and say, I know it's not what you're hearing, but let me tell you what's right. So if there's anything I can say to the people who are in the audience today, if you are a parent or a grandmother, or if you are an aunt and uncle, a sister, a brother, you need to take your power back. It is no longer time for the elitists in Washington to pass policies and tell you whether or not you actually own your own children, because their hearts and minds belong to you and them alone.
So here's my policy idea for that. May require Congress, but if the president were to do something like this, take the $500 million giveaway in loan amnesty for student loans, right, for people who had not been working, take all that money back and give it to taxpaying parents in a form of educational credits and vouchers so that they could use that education money so they do not have their kids indoctrinated by the government-run public schools. Take the money from the hardworking people that lost it and give it back to them and give it to the parents. That's the way.
2 for 1 shot. We've just solved it.
I think day one signing the Kids Online Safety Act, looking at what the FCC could do around Section 230. But I think, as both Sarah and Roger mentioned, it's going to take an all-the-above approach, both on the state and federal level. But I think we have to understand, to Sarah's point, that all the institutions are set against parents. Mm-hmm. They're working against parents, whether it's the state school bureaucracy, the DEI woke bureaucracy, or Silicon Valley. They're all on the same team. And to the extent that we are able to sort of split their forces up, I think that is the future for our movement, to be able to take back some of our sovereignty and power.
Yeah. Amen to that. If this does not give you hope in the fight again, our culture war fight to take back our rights as parents and to protect our children, I don't know what will. Daniel Cochran, Sarah Parshall-Perry, and Roger Severino, thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Okay, so if everybody hasn't heard, I'm sure everybody's seen it on their phone. Who is it? And have you all read President Trump's X tweet about it on Truth Social? Yeah, he said he's going to be spending a lot of time in Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and all these interesting states. So great pick. We are good friends with J.D. Vance. I heard earlier today, you heard Dr. Roberts talking about he's got a forthcoming book in September. I think he mentioned that in his remarks. And Senator J.D. Vance actually wrote the introduction. So great news. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to enter the home stretch here. And that means we've got one pillar left, talking about the economic and energy policies that we need to have so that we can lead free lives. And we're going to wrap then with Tucker Carlson. But we want to give you a chance to stretch your legs, give you 10 minutes. If you need to run out and grab a drink at the back, feel free to do that. But we're going to come back here in 10 minutes and hit that, and then we will be heading into the reception after. So take that 10-minute break now. Thank you.
Please take your seat. The program is about to begin. Once again, please take your seat. The program is about to begin. Please welcome back to the stage Heritage Counselor and Spokesperson Genevieve Wood.
I can't see everybody up in the balcony, but hello to everybody up in the balcony. Great to see you. Oh, now I see big waves. Hello, hello. Oh, I see Larry and Diane. I can actually make out faces. Good to see you guys. And again, I want to say hello to everybody who's been watching via our live stream. We've had several thousand people watching via the live stream all day today. So in addition to all of you here, all those across the country watching, thank you for being a part of this. Well, we are into our home stretch. We talked about a lot of important issues, but the next issue set that we want to talk about deals with the economy and energy. And we know that in polling we've done in battleground states around the country, the top issues to those voters dealt with gas, groceries, and rent, and the cost of all those things. And we believe as conservatives, we need to be putting forth policies that allow people to buy the kind of cars they want to buy, drive the kind of cars they want to drive, use the kind of energy they want to use, be able to afford a home. People should have these rights to live freely. And so that's what our next round of programming is about. And to start us off, we're going to be welcomed by the governor of the great state of Oklahoma, and I say that as a Texan, a great state of Oklahoma, Kevin Stitt, who's going to talk about what we should be looking at in terms of the right energy policies. Then my colleague, our Chief Advancement Officer, Andrew Olivastro, is going to lead a discussion on the economy and the challenges many families across this country are facing. And then we will round it out with Tucker Carlson. So before we welcome Governor Stitt to the stage, please take a look at the screens. Thank you.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These God-given rights are the foundation of the American dream, the secret to the success of the American experiment in self-governance. But today, the American dream seems out of reach. While everyday Americans struggle to fill their gas tanks and pay for groceries, and leftist policies squelch our energy production, elites wield the power of government to advance their own agendas. Big tech censorship undermines free speech, and liberal college campuses squelch expression of thought.
You know what NYU is doing?
A corrupt judicial system gives sweetheart deals to political friends while prosecuting conservatives, from President Trump to the pro-life activist grandmother praying for unborn babies and their mothers. The powers of the intelligence agencies have been turned against the very citizens they were designed to protect. Government regulators stack the deck against small businesses and large families while helping woke corporations get ahead. Reckless government spending has saddled our children with an enormous national debt that threatens their chances to pursue the good life. Our job is to ensure the next generation has hope to achieve the American dream. We must secure our God-given rights to live freely. We know what we are fighting for. We are fighting for America's future.
Please welcome Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt.
Hey everybody, how's everybody doing today? I'm pumped to be in Milwaukee. This is going to be great. I just want to first take a moment to condemn the act of evil that occurred the other day and the assassination attempt on President Trump. Just so thankful that the Lord protected him, and I just can't even imagine how close that was. And so, just in a few days, we're going to be putting him forward as the nominee for our party for President of the United States, and just super excited for that. So this reminds me, a couple years ago at the Democrat National Convention, there was a group of reporters that were running in, and they see this little boy over there, and he's selling puppies. And he's saying, "Come get your Democrat puppies here. Get your Democrat puppies." And the press is like, "Oh, a cute little boy," and they go on in. And 2 weeks later was the Republican National Convention. And the press is there, and they're running in, and they see a boy over there selling puppies again. And he's saying, "Come get your Republican puppies. Get your Republican puppies here." And the press is like so curious. They're like, "Man, I wonder if that's the same little boy that 2 weeks ago was selling Democrat puppies." So curiosity gets the better of them, and so they go over and they say, "Are you the same boy that was here 2 weeks ago selling Democrat puppies?" He said, "Yes, sir, I sure am." And they said, "Well, what changed between 2 weeks ago to today?" And he looked at them and he's like, "Well, now the puppies have their eyes open." Oh, man. Just making sure I was in the right audience here. But we're here this week to fight for the American dream and really our way of life. Our founders, the American dream meant freedom to worship, freedom to assemble, freedom to speak one's mind. It meant that there was no limit to what someone could accomplish. It meant freedom from the government, not control by the government. The American dream is really the belief that everyone is capable of anything he sets his mind to. That each of us is endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that we all in America have endless opportunities that if we're willing to work hard for them. And now, nearly 250 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, it's time for us to reclaim that American dream. I love how Ronald Reagan would say it. He said, "Government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem." We all know that in here. A perfect example of this is in our education system. During the COVID pandemic, blue states across the country, it's so important we don't forget this, were bending to the will of the teachers' unions and were shutting down schools for sometimes up to 2 years. And as a result of that, an entire generation of students were cheated out of their right to an education for the illusion of safety. And in Oklahoma, we believe that you don't put the Constitution in the attic just because somebody in Washington, D.C. tells you to. States like Oklahoma, we put students first. We kept all of our schools open. And I was one of the only governors in the country that refused to do a mask mandate statewide. Y'all remember all the mask mandates? It was unbelievable. Nationally, public education has seen a 20% drop in language arts proficiencies, a 37% drop in math proficiency. And even after seeing these results from these lockdowns, blue states are still deferring to teachers' unions. They want parents in the dark about what's being taught to their children. In red states, we call that stuff crazy. We're pushing back, and we're seeing huge education freedom choice movements across the country. In Oklahoma, we passed the very, very best school choice plan in the entire country. And now, every parent, regardless of income, has a refundable tax credit or a voucher to go to a school of their choice. And here's what I tell people. Listen, rich people already have school choice. They can send their kids to any school that they want. And if you were governor and you had to talk to the single moms that are trapped, or the single dads, or people without resources, and they're in school districts where their kids are getting a failing education, it would break your heart. Now everything's possible in Oklahoma. We also became the very first state in the country to approve a religious charter school. Okay? We're so excited about that too. St. Isidore is a Catholic school that's going to be set up in the state of Oklahoma. The American dream is making sure that every kid has the opportunity to get the education that best fits their needs. So let's talk about government control versus free markets in the energy sector. You know, in blue states, the government is trying to control what car you drive. They're trying to say what stoves you can have in your house. I mean, it's getting weirder and weirder. On day one in office, think about this. President Biden started putting up roadblocks to American energy dominance. He canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. You remember that? Okay, Cushing, Oklahoma. Cushing, Oklahoma is right in the middle of our state. That is the largest commercial storage of oil in the entire country. It's 100 million barrels. Did you know that there's already 2 pipelines from Canada to Cushing, Oklahoma? One of them's called the Keystone. The Keystone XL was going to be the 3rd pipeline. Okay, it is absolute common sense that the safest way to move oil and natural gas is through pipelines instead of train or trucks. It's just unbelievable. It all gets so political. West Texas Intermediate, WTI, is priced not in West Texas, but from Cushing, Oklahoma. And then the pipelines go on down to Houston and Louisiana to meet the needs of our citizens there. You know, President Biden has leased fewer acres of land for energy projects than any other president in history. I give you the stats. It's just unbelievable. Because of Joe Biden's anti-energy, American energy policies, taxpayers are now stuck spending about $1.7 trillion in hidden energy costs. This is crazy because states like Oklahoma can meet the need of Americans and our allies around the world, in Pennsylvania and Texas and other states. Oklahoma, we're so proud of our all-of-the-above energy story. And I'll tell you real quick, we're number 6 in the country in oil production. We're number 5 in natural gas production. But here's what people don't realize. We're also number 3 in the country in electricity generated by wind, okay? We have an all-of-the-above approach. We're one of only 4 states that 45% of our energy comes from renewables. Okay, that blows away the people on the, some of the coasts that are just the green stuff, that they think about states like Oklahoma that are leading the way on an all-of-the-above approach. President Biden also halted, y'all see his LNG ban, okay? LNG exports, he's banning LNG exports from the U.S., which is really hurting our allies. It's denying our allies around the world access to clean, reliable energy. And it really drives our allies into the arms of our adversaries. Here's a news flash. Every country has to heat their homes and their businesses. They have to drive to work, take their kids to school. They need energy. And so they're going to get it from us, or they're going to get it from people that may not like us very much. I always talk about energy as a national security issue. Energy security is really your national security. Because the Biden administration has done everything it can to squash our domestic energy supply, the U.S. and our allies are less safe. We have seen unprecedented aggression from adversaries around the world. Nothing is more evident than when we watched Hamas' brutal attack on Israel on October 7th. Myself and Governor Abbott took a trip over there, and we met with Netanyahu, and we met with President Herzog as well, and saw what was happening. It was unbelievable. It'd be like at a concert in the U.S., terrorists coming in with machine guns and just mowing down our young people. We visited them in the hospital. It was the most brutal attack you could imagine. And here's the deal. By lifting sanctions on Iran, the Biden administration has made them flush with cash right now, and they're using it to fund terrorist groups around the world. Let me tell you something. A Trump administration would immediately put sanctions back on Iran and bring stability back to the region. The other thing President Trump is passionate about is reducing our reliance on China. Right now, China controls 60% of the critical mineral supply chain and about 75% of the manufacturing. And critical minerals, if you think about it, they go into everything from our smartphones to satellites in space to our F-35 fighters. In America, we have the workforce, we've got the technology. A lot of times we invented this processing technology and the resources to bring this supply chain back to America. We're leading the way in Oklahoma. We've made announcement after announcement because of our business-friendly approach. We just landed USA Rare Earth, which is the first ever mineral to magnet manufacturer in the U.S. And I encourage you to check out my op-ed I wrote in the Wall Street Journal last summer on this exact topic. And it was talking about America needs to have a strategic stockpile for critical minerals like we do in the oil and gas space. We need to set up relationships around the world in Africa and in South America to make sure that we develop those relationships because China is out in front doing those. You know, it's no secret that the Biden administration has been terrible for our economy. And over the last few years, Americans have been choked by inflation. It's hurting Oklahomans, it's hurting Americans all over this country. We're spending 20% more on everything that we need. You know, when President Trump left office, inflation was below 2%. And in 2021, your average gallon of gasoline was $2.40 a gallon. Today, it's $3.50. That's causing everything to cost more. But for Democrats, that's not a mistake. They want more reliance on the government. They've taken programs that were supposed to be a hand up, and they've really turned them into a hammock where people are sitting in them. The deficit spending to fund these social programs has caused our national debt to skyrocket. And now, when you really think about it, we are spending a quarter of our income, okay? A quarter of your income is on interest-only payments. Right now, our interest-only payments on our national debt is more than we spend on our national defense. Just think about that for a second. You know, I like to describe it like this. When I graduated, I went to Oklahoma State, I got an accounting degree, got my first job in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I bought my first house right across at 8th and Harvard, right across from TU. And I spent $66,000 on my first house. I was pumped. I was dating my wife, Sarah, at the time. We've been married for 26 years, by the way. But thank you. $66,000 for my first house. My house payment was about $550. And I remember making my first house payment. I was 27 years old. And I looked at it, it was $550, and only $49 went towards principal. And I was like, what? And the rest was interest. But at least I knew that in 30 years, when I looked at the amortization schedule, that I was going to own my house at 8th and Harvard. Folks, we don't do principal and interest on our national debt. It's interest only. That means we're never going to pay it off. And it gets worse because right now, they keep piling on top of it. So our revenue is about $4.4 trillion. You would think they would spend about $4.4 trillion. They spend $6.4 trillion, right? They're spending $2 trillion over what our income is, and that's just making it harder and harder and harder and harder for the taxpayers. But at the end of it all, if they control our education, if they control our energy and our economy, they'll next go after our ethics. You know, it's really already happening. We are living, I tell Oklahomans, I mean, this is like, I'm living in the twilight zone here when people think it's okay to perform sex change surgeries on children. They think that a child who can't get a tattoo, can't buy a gun or vote, but it's okay for them to have life-altering surgeries. They think it's okay to expose children to inappropriate sexual material regardless of their age. They believe that men should be able to compete against women in sports, hold records. I mean, we're seeing that all the time, like, hey, this dude broke this female swimming and track record. They believe it's okay for men to be incarcerated in women's prisons or chained in women's locker rooms. We know that's crazy, and it's not happening in Oklahoma, I'll tell you that. I was the first governor to ban men and women's sports. Thank you. The Washington Post called me and like, Governor, you signed this controversial bill. And I was like, it's really not controversial in Oklahoma. We know the difference between boys and girls. But I also had to sign an executive order to define what a woman was, to make sure that women weren't going into, or men weren't going into women's prisons, because we were seeing that happen in other states. You know, they know if they can break apart our families, that they can exert even more control over us. And, you know, we're seeing record levels of fatherlessness across our country right now. Today, nearly 18 million children are living without a father in the home. The statistics paint a grim picture. So 71% of those who drop out of high school grew up without a father. 71% of those that drop out. 66% of juveniles that are in state custody for some kind of problem grew up without a father. So in Oklahoma, we're tackling that. We're promoting fatherhood. We know that the best place for a kid is at home with their mom and their dad. And in red states, we're fighting for families so they can keep fighting for the American dream. And you guys are here today because you believe in freedoms, not government control. You know that there's hope in that American dream, and it is worth all of us fighting for. So I just thank y'all so much. You are the leaders of your community. You're here at the Heritage Foundation, so you're making sure that you're here taking this message back to your states. And it's clear that the American dream can't survive another 4 years of Joe Biden. That's why it's so important that we bring common sense back to the White House. I'm grateful for groups like the Heritage Foundation who are advocating for freedoms. They're engaging the decision makers and educating Americans about the most important issues that are facing us today. The founders of our country envisioned that there's no limitation to what we can accomplish, but it does matter who we choose to lead us. And there's only one choice in this next election. Thank you all so much for being engaged and for working to keep that American dream alive. God bless you, and may God continue to bless this great nation of ours. Thank you so much.
Please welcome Heritage Chief Advancement Officer, Andy Olivastro.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again to Governor Stitt. We love when Governor Stitt takes some time with us. I think we're going to hear a lot more from Governor Stitt over the next couple of years, and that's a remarkable good thing for our country. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd now like you to join me in welcoming Andy Puzder, Senior Distinguished Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and John Schlifsky, the Chairman and CEO of Northwestern Mutual. Andy, John, please come on out. Now, these two gentlemen are going to join me in a conversation about supercharging the American economy. And I'd just like to say, I've had the privilege of working with Andy Puzder for quite a number of years now. He's a Senior Distinguished Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, like I said, and for many years was the CEO of CKE Restaurants, which is Carl's Jr.'s and Hardee's and many other franchises. And John Schlifsky, who I just had a chance to meet backstage, is the Chairman and CEO of Northwestern Mutual, one of Milwaukee's best businesses, of course. And in terms of disclosures, I feel like it's important to tell you that I am a customer of Northwestern Mutual. I have a term life insurance for them. And clearly, I've eaten at a lot of Hardee's restaurants. So now that we have those disclosures out of the way, I do want to go to John first on this one.
Sure.
John is he's also leading the RNC's fundraising efforts for the convention here in Milwaukee. And they have blown through all of their goals, and they've had a remarkable fundraising effort. And so congratulations to John and the team that he pulled together for that. But John, is that because you're leading it? Is it because it's Milwaukee? Is it the RNC? Is it President Trump? Tell us why.
I think it's Milwaukee. I was using this analogy earlier. It's
I feel like I'm a lifelong resident of Milwaukee, and we're so proud of this city. And it feels to me like the time, you've got your girlfriend or a boyfriend and you're introducing them to your parents for the first time, and you're so excited to introduce them, and you're so hopeful it's all going to go well. And Milwaukee is a city that we're very proud of. Milwaukee, it's on an upward trajectory. Sometimes we get overshadowed by Chicago, and so for us to have 50,000 visitors coming to Milwaukee and our ability to showcase the city is just maybe a once-in-a-lifetime thing. So we seized on the opportunity, and I will tell you, everybody saw it for what it is, which is a huge event for the city. My fundraising efforts rarely devolved into politics. It was all about what's in the best interest of the city, how can we showcase the city, and how can we look as good as possible. And I think that's why we did so well.
That's wonderful, and certainly been successful, yes. And, many of us have only been here for, a day and a half now, but just a wonderful welcome across Milwaukee. So thank you very much for that.
Glad to hear it.
Shifting to you, Andy Puzder, you're often on Fox News, on CNBC. You have an NBC News interview right as we depart here later today. Tell us about the economy right now. Is it bust or is it boom?
Well, it depends upon how you look at it. If you look at it like an economist, economists can make a lot of arguments that things are improving, that inflation rate isn't as bad as it was. Unemployment rate, if you look at the technical numbers, seems to be coming down. But if you look at it like the American people do, the economy's in real trouble, and so are the American people. Inflation may be down to 3%, which, by the way, is still a full percentage point above the 2% target that the Fed sets. But when prices are up 3%, that means they're up 3% on top of all the other price increases we've had since Biden had that March 2021 American Rescue Plan, which was, talk about a terrible name for a bill, because it did just the opposite of rescuing America. We've now seen Americans have experienced about 20% cumulative inflation since Biden took office. 20%, and that's a fifth. You notice that when you go to the grocery store. And if you look at the unemployment numbers, you hear about these jobs numbers every month that are good, and then of course you hear the next month how they were revised down. But leaving that aside, I don't think people really look at the number of jobs. They look at whether or not they have a job. And if you look at the employment numbers, the numbers that back up the unemployment rate, you'll see that we've only added in the past year about 300,000 jobs. Now that's a plus, right? Well, the interesting thing is that we have 900,000 fewer Native Americans employed. The number of Native Americans working is down 900,000. The number of immigrants working is up 1.2 million. So those 300,000 jobs all went to people that are immigrants. Now, many of them may be here legally. A number of them may be very good people, but I'll bet the most of them went to people that are not here legally. And if you look at the number of part-time jobs versus full-time jobs are actually down 1.5 million, while part-time jobs are up 1.8 million. So the whole 300,000 additional people working are people that are working part-time that weren't born in the United States. So it's no wonder that the American people feel that something's wrong with the economy. The American people understand the economy much better than the experts do.
Excellent points. John, how about from your point of view, all of your customers, they're interested in making money now. That's why they're working. They're interested in saving for retirement. What does your customer base say about the state of the economy right now?
So I think the real issue that's going on from an economic perspective is broader than just what the economy looks like today. I mean, we're a 170-year-old company. I mean, we're going to see recessions and booms and busts, but there's something that we're missing, I think, which is we're coming off this era of really easy money. And so we had over a decade of very low interest rates. It started to come out of it when Trump was first elected. Then we went back to even lower during the pandemic. And there's a whole asset reprice that's going on. And so I think most people that are customers of ours are finding their ability to provide for retirement, save for their loved ones, all that stuff is harder than they thought. And they're really concerned about their ability to put as much money away as they can, given some of the inflationary pressures that were just talked about. So when you look at the state of the consumer, even those that are working full time, the pressure to make ends meet and save a requisite amount for the future is getting harder and harder and harder, I think.
Do you think, it's a wonderful point, and Andy, maybe I'll ask you this, the manner in which people make money, and as that shifted and changed, Donald Trump has talked about not taxing tips and things like that. What do you think about that in a time like this? What do you think about that as an economic stimulus in any manner?
I think the not taxing tips point, the argument that the left made was that this was political, that it was a political move. He was in Nevada. They have a lot of tipped employees. But if you think about it, there's really three contingencies here. One is consumers, the other is employees, and the other is employers. And then how did their interest affect the economy? And if you look at consumers, well, consumers, if you're not taxing tips, if the person serving you gets more money because their tips aren't taxed, their inclination is going to be to give you better service. And you then have the power. See, this is what elites hate. They hate it when you have the power. They hate it when consumers have the power. This is why they like socialism and don't like capitalism. But you have the power then to determine the salary of the person who waited on you in some respect. And then as far as employees love this, obviously, because they get to take home more of what they earn. It's why you find there's something called the tip credit, where tipped employees are paid a lower minimum wage, but they get to keep their tips. Well, tipped employees hate the idea that the Democrats and the left have, that they want to eliminate the tip credit and just get that regular old, $15 or $20 an hour minimum wage. The employees love getting tips. They love being able to earn their success. And this is obviously a big boost to them. But the part I think that people miss is employers will love this, because your labor costs go down. Labor costs have been zooming. So restaurants are closing. Any retail establishment is suffering because of these increased labor costs, which you can't build as much as you'd like to. You can't expand as much as you'd like to. You can't really do the things that you can do when your costs are lower, so your profits and your investable capital are higher. And this gives employers the opportunity to turn some of the responsibility for what an employee earns directly to consumers, because they'll determine it, and directly to employees, because it'll be based on their performance. This is like the worst possible results. It's the perfect storm against what the Democrats believe, which is that elites should control what people make and where the economy goes. But it's a huge benefit to people who believe that consumers, employees, and employers should be running the economy. The economic benefit will be that if employers have more money, because their labor costs come down as their employees' wages are in part paid by consumer tips, then they can grow more, they can expand, they can open more businesses, and the economy will benefit. So people aren't giving President Trump, not that they ever gave him the credit he deserves, and maybe they are now after the incident the other day, but they don't give him the credit he deserves on the economy. His intuition about what works economically is incredibly good, and I think this is a great example of that.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah. With that in mind, John, maybe you have a point of view on tipping itself and those sort of proposals, but in a different sense, or maybe in another way to approach it would be, when you look at an inflationary economy, or an economy that has rapid inflation or slowing rates of inflation, but still positive inflation, how does that affect how you guys think about your business, how you operate, and what advice you give to customers and clients?
Well, the biggest problem with inflation is that it's a tax on savings at some level. And from a general tax policy perspective, we would say that our two biggest policy angles are don't tax work as much and don't tax savings as much, right? So those are the things that drive the economic growth of this country. And the more you tax something, the less you get of it. We all know that. So from a policy perspective, I think taxing work less and taxing savings less would be a better thing. Inflation is sort of that hidden tax that everybody pays, whether you like it or not. And as I said, we're in this period where we've got too much money chasing too few goods. And by the way, it doesn't just show up in consumer inflation, but this is this notion of assets that I was talking about. So we've got real estate, all-time highs, things like that, because of all this money that's sloshing around in the system. And so I think you've got to look at both the notion of a more coherent tax policy that incentivizes people to things that grow the economy, and a monetary policy that doesn't just feed money into the system and creates more fiscal balance.
No, I like that a lot. All right, so neither one of these two gentlemen appears to be the VP nominee. But we're going to ask each of them, we'll start with you, Andy, and then go to you, John. If the president called you right now and said, I want you to be my VP nominee, get over here to Fiserv Forum, but you're sitting there, what's your number one policy that you're advancing in terms of supercharging the U.S. economy as you're sitting in that room and you're getting prepared to take office?
You want to go first, John, or you want me to go first?
You go first. Yeah.
First of all, if the president calls you to serve, you serve. That's my opinion. If he calls, you have to do it. Secondly, I think the most important economic policy out there that affects inflation, affects the cost of goods, affects the cost of everything, how the economy can grow, what we can do in the world is energy. We need to be encouraging the energy sector to produce as much oil and natural gas as it possibly can, as quickly as it can, because it not only affects the economy, it also affects our international relations. I mean, if we could make Japan and Europe independent of Russia, if we can drive down the cost of oil to the Russians so that they don't have the money to continue fighting this war they're waging in Ukraine, if we could take money from Iran by increasing our production and reducing the cost of oil, I think we would see an economic boom, and we would see the world become a more peaceful place, much as it was when President Trump was president and oil prices were very low. We also need to replenish our strategic petroleum reserve, which President Trump filled it up with cheap oil, and Joe Biden got in there and sold most of it. So we need to get that refilled, and we want to do that at reasonable prices. So for those reasons, I would focus immediately, number one issue, on energy. Now I have other issues 2 and 3 that I think are as important, but that would be number one.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Maybe we'll get to 2 and 3.
But so I won't take energy independence, even though I agree with that, and I would argue that I don't think President Trump even knows I'm alive. So I've got my ringer on, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to ring in the next 15 or 20 minutes.
After all the success you've had here at the convention already?
I don't think so. But you know, what I would...
You'd be surprised.
What I would add to that is I think we need a federal government that's focused on fiscal responsibility. We have unsustainable spending, unsustainable deficits. You heard the governor talk about it a minute ago. It's not due to tax revenue. Tax revenue is growing at a nice clip. It's that we don't have any spending discipline, and we just can't keep this up. There is an expiration date on this kind of behavior. I don't know when it is. I don't know if it's next year or 5 years from now, but at some point, you can't just keep doing that, and it really threatens all sorts of aspects of what we would think of as the classic conservative American economy: freedom, liberty, the ability to do what you want, because it's not sustainable. And so I think we need to have a return to more fiscal responsibility, more focus on what we're spending money on, less focus on always thinking that more spending is the answer to a problem, and have more targeted spending that's more tied to solutions. I know that's easy to say up here, and it's hard to do because people are used to it, but at the end of the day, it's going to happen one way or the other, and if we get in front of it, it'll be easier than if we have to do it in a crisis.
I don't know, gentlemen. I think you both could handle your own big boy press conferences if you had to, right? You know, if you think about...
But the question, when did the measure of whether somebody's qualified to be president come down to you can do a press conference?
Yeah.
Wasn't that like a throwaway, like you kind of expect them to do a press?
Yeah.
This is like saying, you know, the test of whether you'd be a good wife is can you cook a dinner, or a good husband, can you cook a dinner? It's not. You know, anyway. We'll get back to the economy now.
Yeah. I knew we'd hit a chord with that one. The concept of fiscal restraint and the concept of, you know, a growing economy we have right now, no matter what happens in an election, although we can all understand the direction it's going, thank God for the country, is that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has provisions that are going to expire. And so how is it that growth is one of the best antidotes to any of the challenges that we face, but yet we have members of Congress, House and Senate, who seem opposed to those things that are in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that created a lot of growth for the economy?
Well, and not only did it produce a lot of growth, it produced more taxable revenue. It produced more revenue. So we, you know, the Congressional Budget Office said that we were going to have $1.1 trillion less in revenue over the first 10 years. And it looks like we're going to have almost $1 trillion in excess revenue above what they thought we would get with higher tax rates. So it's not only do people get to keep more money, but consistent with Art Laffer's curve, when you have lower tax rates, you generate economic growth and you produce more tax revenue. And you hear Biden, everybody's heard Biden talk, oh no, we've had all kind of economic growth. The economic growth's been great. We're wonderful, good economic growth. Well, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has been in effect his entire presidency. So to the extent that he has had economic growth to any extent, he's got to give some credit to Trump because the Tax Cuts and Job Act is there. And by the way, he said he won't raise taxes on people that make less than $400,000 a year. Guess where 90% of the tax revenue comes from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act? It comes from people who make less than $400,000 a year. So if you get rid of the tax cuts, you don't get to keep part of it and get rid of part of it if you're the president. You either let it expire, right, or you renew it, or you enact a new bill. So this idea that we're going to let the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expire and it isn't going to hurt people to make less than $400,000 a year is as truthful as just about everything else Joe Biden has said over the past 3 years. It makes absolutely no sense, and it's just false. So the Tax Cuts and Job Act is huge, and I haven't even mentioned, maybe John can do this better than me, but there are real incentives for growth in there with respect to expensing and amortizing investments, business investments. So there's advantages to doing that. And by the way, the corporate income tax cut that Biden hates, it doesn't expire.
That's right.
That's not one of the things that expire. You know, you listen to Biden talking, you think, does he have any idea what he's talking about? And then you listen to him for another minute and you realize he has no idea what he's talking about or even where he is or how to get off stage. So, but no, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is hugely important.
We get off stage that way. Just
Thank you.
So, you know, there's no doubt that the tax cuts of 2017 were pro-growth. I think the revenue demonstrates that. We tax less of something, we got more of it. You know, the corporate rate does, you're 100% right, it doesn't expire. What expires is a number of policy decisions that were made under reconciliation. And I think the answer to what's going to happen next is really you tell me who's going to win what branch of the government. It's highly likely we'll have divided government at worst from if you're a Republican. The notion that the Democrats can hold the Senate is almost zero. And so you're going to have at least probably Republican control of the Senate. When you have a reconciliation package, it has to move through the budget committees, and so that'll have a huge impact on things. What I'm really curious to see is what parts of the expiring stuff they're going to be able to keep at the same time as figure out how to pay for them. And so you look at the SALT deduction, for example, which is a very positive thing for most conservatives, but there's a lot of blue state Republicans who are afraid of that and want to see that come back from an income tax deduction. So even within the party, there are people who want certain things and don't. And I think it would be just as likely as picking who's going to win the Super Bowl is to tell you what's going to happen. Our hope is that there's a concerted effort around pro-growth policies, and I just want to make one more pitch. Part of the problem with the government, let's say the big government, is they don't think about ever cutting spending. You know, I run a Fortune 100 company. If I said to my board, our budget's out of control, we're just going to have to raise prices, it doesn't work that way. We would sell less of what we make, and we would never hit our budget, and so you have to have budget restraint. And we need a government that can focus on both things at the same time. Pro-growth, the faster we grow, the less this tax burden becomes, or less this deficit problem becomes, but we also have to have spending restraint, because you can't do one without the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent point. Thank you. You know, John, maybe I'll stick with you on this one. You've been chairman and CEO for about 15 years, been with Northwestern Mutual for over 30 years, I believe. You know, we're talking a lot about economics, and we're talking about supercharging the economy. You know, economics at its most base is the study of human behavior, and so we're talking about opportunity for people. Tell us a little bit about your employee base. Tell us about what you look for. How has that changed? Do you find that the sort of new employee is ready to tackle these economic challenges in this way? There are additions to the workforce. How's the education system producing good talent for you? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we continue to grow. We continue to hire. Our headcount goes up most years. So, you know, we're not a fast growth company. We're 160-some years old, but we're a steady, slow growth company, and that provides lots of opportunity for employment. What I would say the biggest shift in terms of who we're hiring practically is the orientation toward technology. When I started at Northwestern Mutual in 1987, we hired a lot of liberal arts graduates with MBAs, law degrees, finance backgrounds, and we still need those kind of people. That's a cornerstone of our company, core competencies that make us as what we are. But increasingly, the ability to be in the tech industry, and whether you're a programmer, you understand how systems work and all that, is what's going on. And we started in town here with both the major universities, Marquette University and the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, the Northwestern Mutual Data Science Institute, which is a proof point about trying to get more high school kids and then college kids excited about careers and things like data science, because that's really the future of our business. If you think about it, the data powers so much of the business decisions, and so it's not just collecting that data, but using that data. And so what I tell I have 6 kids, they're all going to college. I think liberal arts education is an amazing thing, and I encourage them to do that kind of thing. I'm not trying to dissuade it, but you have to have strong STEM skills too. You can't just be I was an econ major. I don't even know just econ major enough is anymore. I really encourage them to have a background around technological stuff, because even if you're not actually programming it, knowing how it works is important. And I joke, Northwestern Mutual, you think I'm the CEO of a life insurance company. I'm the CEO of a technology company. The majority of our budget dollars go to technology year after year after year, and the ability to understand how to deploy those resources, where to deploy them, how to be efficient with someone with no tech background was frankly something I didn't understand when I took the job. And so I would just encourage everybody to know how things work, understand how they work, and be prepared to engage in that battle.
Yeah, that's excellent. Excellent advice for everybody out here. I know that we got a family friend named Robbie Tandy out here somewhere who's in college, and so he's probably listening pretty closely. Maybe he'll go to work for you at Northwestern Mutual or your successor there. But Andy, same question about people, right? And we maybe get close to that with the tips conversation. But how has the workforce changed in your mind, and what do you see in terms of obviously keeping in touch and offering counsel to a lot of the business leaders that you've worked with over the years?
My major concern is this recent trend towards DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, where you've now got people who believe they're entitled to their job or entitled to their position because of who they are, not what they do. They want to be judged on the basis of race or sex as opposed to their qualification, character, and merit. I've been retired now since 2017, so 7-8 years. And then that's changed a lot. There was really no talk of DEI when I was running CKE restaurants. And our general managers, which is really the kind of the backbone of the company, it's where people are promoted from you're a general manager of a restaurant, you have management talent, and people get promoted up from there. We were 70% female and 69% minority when I ran the company when I left. But I always made it a point of saying to everybody, nobody in this company is going to be promoted based on race or sex. If you get a job, you're going to get a job because you earned it. And I think that's a very encouraging thing for people. It's the kind of thing that makes you want to keep working, that you have value, that your employer values what you do, not just who you are, but what you're able to do. And it's what causes people to work harder, to be more dedicated. It's what keeps kids off the street and in school. I mean, it's the kind of thing that makes a real difference in people's lives. And I see that dissipating under this new regime where you don't hire people based on their skills or their ability. You hire them based on equity principles, where we're going to try and make everybody the same. Kamala Harris, who's a great beneficiary of this system, is also a great proponent of this system. Much different than much different than Martin Luther King, who, as many of you know, said, "I look forward to the day when my children will be judged not on the color of their skin, but on the quality of their character." And I think we need to get back to a workforce where we all acknowledge people should be judged based on the quality of the character and their merit, not based upon any other artificial characteristics. Because I can tell you, there are many things that determine whether a person is successful or unsuccessful, but the amount of melanomen in their skill or the number of chromosomes are not two of those things. What really determines your success is your determination, your ability, your education, and your desire to move forward in life. And those are the things you need to look for in employees and in a workforce.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. John, so I mentioned, and I think it's really remarkable, such a long career at Northwestern Mutual and 15 years as chairman and CEO. But if you were going to if tomorrow was day one as CEO, what would you do? If tomorrow was your first day as CEO of Northwestern Mutual?
Well, I think I touched on it before. I really think that I underestimated the role of technology in our company, and not just technology, but the ability to use data. I make the argument all the time that data is what drives a life insurance company, and we know more about our clients than probably any other company in America. And so our ability to use that data in a way that benefits them, not in a way to commercialize it, not to sell it to Google or sell it to some other company, but to use that data to make them better off is something I would have focused on. And the second thing is, frankly, from a public policy perspective, I oftentimes think that government officials sometimes understand a policy issue differently than the people down in the trenches actually running things. And we need to be, as leaders of industry and leaders of companies, we need to be more engaged in some of these public policy issues, not because we necessarily oppose them, but because we need to influence the way they've gone. And you know, the example I always use is around your genetics and your ability to understand your genetic makeup. And there's many people who want to argue from a public policy perspective that that's yours and yours alone, and you don't have to disclose it to anyone. And I would say, from Northwestern Mutual's perspective, we don't need to know that. We can underwrite you just the way we always underwrite you. But if you know it, then you have to disclose it to us, because otherwise we have what's called adverse selection. And this is where public policy people mistake what could be a good notion around privacy with the way businesses are run. And so I would be more involved in that. I think that's helpful to government leaders to get the right policy at the right time.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I once heard something that stuck with me, that was that data, as important as it is, we are creators of it, we're consumers of it, it's very important for the business community. You know, data is not information, information is not knowledge, knowledge is not wisdom, and wisdom is not necessarily virtue. And so as we think about public policy that we try to have for our society, you have to think through all these kind of things. Maybe the last thing I would ask each of you, did you have a comment on that, or otherwise I'll go to a different question?
No, I think John stated it very well. I think I'd like my employees to know that there's a lot of talk now about about businesses doing well by doing good. In other words, you do well financially by doing good socially and politically. And I think I'd like my employees to understand that we can't do anybody any good until we're doing well financially as a company. We can't help our employees or anybody else. Okay. So I might have a talk with them about that, but we only have 2 minutes, so I'm going to let you go to your last question here.
So thank you, gentlemen. My last question for each of you is, what gives you hope? What do you hope for tomorrow, for a year from now, for 10 years from now?
I think this is a great country. I don't think it's broken. I think what happened on Saturday is a disaster, and it's an example of horrific things that can happen to any great country. But America has ingenuity, we have liberty, we have hardworking people, we have people who want to do well for themselves and their families. And I think that is uniquely American in so many ways, and that's what gives me hope. And I don't think the American dream is in danger at all, and I think it's actually ready for the next sort of reset and reinvigoration. I'm really excited about that.
Wonderful. Andy?
I agree with everything John said. I think he stated it very articulately. I would add in that in our current circumstances, I am very enthusiastic about the fact that we have someone who was, whether you believe was fairly or unfairly, was defeated in 2020 with some shenanigans going on, has been impeached, indicted, convicted, shot, and is still willing to stand up for this country and do the right thing for the American people. And I think that's huge.
What a way to end. Perfect.
Yeah.
Great.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Andy Puzzler and John Schlifsky for joining us.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Kevin Roberts again, but he doesn't know I'm supposed to walk off stage, but I'm going to tell you this is my favorite introduction of Kevin Roberts that I like to do, which is that Kevin Roberts is part Louisiana roughneck, part Wyoming rancher, part Texas academic with a PhD in American history from the University of Texas, and a strong man of faith. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Kevin Roberts is the Heritage Foundation's first Chief Diversity Officer. Please join me in welcoming Kevin Roberts.
Thanks, Andy. I heard a little bit of what he said. It always makes me nervous when Andy introduces me. Perhaps it makes our next guest a little nervous that I'm introducing him, because the last time we were together at Heritage's 50th anniversary, he had a different job. But the great news is that untethered to anything, our guest is someone who sees America for what it is. Still the last best hope for freedom and sovereignty in the world, but also a place that needs some reform. So, before cueing a video about our guest, let me just observe what a tremendous, dare I say, momentous day this is in American history. President Trump, who personifies this movement, is alive and well. Scores of Americans who don't necessarily call themselves conservatives, but they just want to wake up in a normal America, are saying, I want to be part of his movement because of his sacrifices he's making for us. And MSNBC didn't even let Morning Joe on this morning. And right in the middle of this program, we learned that our great friend, Senator J.D. Vance, is President Trump's running mate. So just when you think it can't get any better, it can. And the next video, which I cue now, will explain why.
But you look around and you see these people, and some of them really have paid a heavy price for telling the truth. And they are cast out of their groups, whatever those groups are, but they do it anyway. And I look on at those people with the deepest possible admiration. The people who run our country are destroying it, and they're doing it on purpose. What they've done at the border, completely changing the population of the country, letting in millions and millions of people. My role is to tell the truth to the extent I can see it. Always with the knowledge that we see everything, through a glass darkly. We don't see things clearly, but you do your best. And you cannot allow people to force you to lie, period. I have guns at home, and often on my person when I'm in the United States, I'm proud to say, because I want to defend myself and those I love against violence. I'm defending what I love. And if you're against that, I guess I would ask why? Why would you be against that?
Well, so you don't think you harbor any kind of responsibility for these hate crimes?
The very first thing you should do every single day is tell all the people you love that you love them. And affirming things out loud makes them real. And that is also simultaneously an acknowledgement of a truth that we don't face, which is we don't know what's going to happen today. And reminding yourself of that every single day will bring you, paradoxically, joy.
Please join me in welcoming our great friend and a great doctor of truth, Tucker Carlson.
Thank you. I don't even know where I am. I just landed, and it took me an hour and a half to get here. There's a lot of security. All the security guys look like they should have been in Butler, PA on Saturday. They definitely brought the real ones out this time, thank heaven. Thank you for having me. I am thrilled to be here. I didn't want to come to this convention. Now I'm really grateful that I did. And I spent the whole day dealing with politics this day, starting at 5 a.m., and I forgot how repulsive a process it is, and how feline and ruthless the players are. It was a reminder why I don't like politicians. I never deal with politicians. I deal with people who believe in things, and some I agree with and some I don't agree with, but they're all basically sincere. Even the wackos on the other side are generally sincere. They really mean it. And I kind of get that, and because I think I'm I may be wrong, I certainly have been, but I mean it. But you deal with political people and they don't mean it. All they mean is they want power, that's it. And there's been a lot of jockeying because there are a couple big jobs, well, one big job, which was just awarded. And it's crazy to watch politicians around power. So there's this job, one person makes the decision, and whoever gets the job immediately has a lot of power. And it really is like waving a flank state over an alligator. They're just jumping up and snapping in the air. But they're not doing it in a straightforward way. I mean, I've always wondered, I spent 35 years in Washington, and there are politicians I liked, but I just couldn't help but notice that every single one of them had a weird personal life. Almost every single one. Not all, but most of them. something they were hiding. They were secretly gay, or they were into drugs or alcoholic, or they're cheating on their wife or whatever. And I thought, this is not a random sample of the population. Like, my neighbors aren't living like this. Why is all of the US Congress? And I'm not being mean. I know it sounds like something you say just to be nasty about a group you don't like, but I'm being sincere. Why is that? Why are so many politicians living lies? And it's because that's who they are. I mean, deception is at the core, actually, of who they are. And when you watch them pursue power, it comes right out. Rather than just saying, you know, I think we should do this because here's the outcome. And I think we should avoid that because there's the disaster that will result. It's always, if you do this, I'll give you something secret. It's like the most disgusting thing I've ever seen, and I haven't been around it in a while, and I just watched it up close over the last 24 hours, and I thought, man, I'm glad I'm not around this very often. However, it's worth making yourself see it, and in some cases go through the process because it actually matters. I guess that's the other thing that I learned. So now J.D. Vance is the VP pick, and I think every person who pays close attention has got to be thrilled by that. And if you don't know much about J.D. Vance, I'm not even going to make a case for J.D. Vance. I'm going to tell you what I just saw, which is that every bad person I've ever met in a lifetime in Washington was aligned against J.D. Vance. And I do think the negative case is often more powerful because I know of myself, I do not think I'm a particularly good person. I have strong reasons for feeling that way. I don't always think that my side is right. I know for a fact I have been wrong many, many times. And I hope to correct and be honest about my error. So it's not like I think that, you know, I'm always, you know, God's always on my side. Sometimes I'm not on God's side. But I definitely know who's representing the other side. It's a lot easier to tell who the people who are only in it because they like, I don't know, killing other people in pointless wars. Like, I know who those people are. And their odor is so powerful that I can smell one when he walks in the room. And every single one of those people in a line that would extend from Milwaukee to Chicago was lined up over the last week to knife J.D. Vance. Not on personal grounds. I mean, he's a perfectly nice guy. He's like one of the only members of the Senate with a happy marriage. True. But because they thought he would be harder to manipulate and slightly less enthusiastic about killing people. That's it. That he would be an impediment to their exercising power. And boy, they went after him in a way I've just kind of never seen. Which I think happens every day in Washington. I just don't have a vantage on it because I'm far, far away and grateful to be. And again, I was just reminded that this process is so ugly that normal people do not want to participate in it, and yet normal people have to suck it up and do so anyway because the consequences are just so profound and so very serious. That's the first thing I was reminded of. And the second thing I was reminded of, and I've been thinking about this for the last 15 months since I spoke at Haritage's 50th anniversary, which was the beginning of a total change in the way that I see the world, is that this is not ultimately political. This is much deeper. And I think what happened on Saturday, the assassination attempt against President Trump, reminded a lot of people this, or awakened a lot of people to this. There is a spiritual battle underway. There is no logical way to understand what we're seeing now in temporal terms. You just can't. These are not political divides. There are forces, and they're very obvious now, they've decided for whatever reason to take off the mask, whose only goal is chaos, violence, destruction. And there are the rest of us who, once again, are not always certain we're right, but we know that that's bad, and we're against that. Sort of standing watching, thinking, is someone going to explain to me why this is politics? This is not politics at all. This is much deeper and older and more recognizable than that. This has been going on since the beginning of time. And I do think, by the way, that the more literal among us, and I would count myself in that category, fail to see this because we're so desperate to ascribe some kind of recognizable human motive to what we're seeing. So we call it leftism or neoliberalism or communism or anarchism. We come up with some phrase to describe it. But those phrases are inadequate. They do not describe what's actually happening. So what you're seeing now is really not at all different in substance from what you saw in 1789 in France, from what you saw in 1936 in Spain, from what you saw in 1917 in Russia, from what you saw in 1975 in Phnom Penh. It's all the same. These are forces of chaos and destruction which are fundamentally anti-human, which are against people. By the way, explain that for a second. What kind of movement could be against people? There are all sorts of movements that are against people now. Transhumanism, AI is inherently anti-people. The climate cult is inherently anti-people. Explain that rationally. If your view of the world is, as mine was, derived by an understanding of evolutionary biology. All of us have been raised to see the world through the lens of evolutionary biology. The species does what it does because it's acting in its own interest, and its own interest is to procreate, to pass on its genes, to continue. And so you tell me what we're looking at if the defining movements of our time are against carrying on our genes, procreating, continuing. Is that human? Well, no. Is there any other animal species that kills itself? No. Is genocide known in the natural world? No, it doesn't even make sense. Dogs don't commit genocide against other dogs, maybe against rabbits. That's because they're hungry. But no animal decides to eliminate itself because it's unnatural, so it doesn't happen. No animal commits suicide. That's not found in nature, okay? That's something outside of nature. That's supernatural. And that's what we're seeing, but it's also what we've seen again and again and again throughout history. There are forces within every society, because they reside in the human heart, that are against people. They are dedicated to the destruction of people and the civilizations that people build. And if you pay any attention at all to history, you will recognize it. It's like, wait a second, people are saying exactly the same things. The climate people, the AI people, the transhumanist people, the Biden administration, they're saying exactly the same kinds of things, the same themes that every other movement of this kind, and they had a million different names for them throughout history, were also saying. That's the first thing I noticed. The second thing I noticed is, what do all of these movements over the past 2,000 years have in common? Who do they hate most? As you can tell by what I said about J.D. Vance, I think you learn very much by taking a look at who's mad at whom and about what. So if there's something that threatens you, pay close attention to what makes them angriest. It's certainly true in my business, which is the speech business. What are they trying to get you not to say? What are they punishing you for saying? Those are likely to be the truest things. Not the falsest things. It's not misinformation. It's not disinformation. It's truth. That's why you hate it, obviously. That's obvious now. It took me about 10 years to figure this out. I'm not a super genius. But what group do they dislike most? What group are they absolutely terrified of and hoping to eliminate? Well, it's Christians. That's who it is. It's Christians. And I'm saying this as not a particularly fervent, lifelong Christian. I am a Christian, but I haven't spent my life, surrounded by plumes of incense deep in prayer. I spent my life in a newsroom saying the F word. I mean, I'm not sort of a pious person at all. But I try to be a noticer since I'm paid to do that. And the group that makes them angriest, triggers them most, I guess we would say now, is Christians. Christian nationalism. People pray outside abortion clinics. People who celebrate Easter and not Trans Visibility Day. These are their real enemies. But that's been true in every revolution in the past 2,000 years. It was true during the Cultural Revolution. There weren't many Christians in China. They were the first to be killed. It was true in the French Revolution. They beheaded nuns. What did the nuns do? Were the nuns really an impediment to progress? No, the nuns existed. And they pledged a higher fealty to Jesus. And that was their crime, and for that they were killed. It was true in the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. The communist side, which wasn't really communist at all, it was anti-Christian. Who's the first person they executed? Well, it wasn't a person at all. It was a statue of Jesus. And they opened fire on it with a firing squad. In a picture that when I was a child was famous, it's now probably forgotten in history, probably still available on Google as of this afternoon. You should look it up. But if you find yourself firing bullets at a statue, what you're really doing is revealing your deepest priority. And that's to kill Christians. And why? Well, I can't fully answer that question because I am hardly a theologian, but I do think it tells you everything. I think the most obvious reason is anybody who pledges a higher loyalty to the people in charge who believe themselves to be gods is a threat, but I think it's more than that, because it's not every religion, actually. There are a lot of religions. I respect them all. By the way, I'm just a believer in faithfulness and acknowledging that you're not God. I'm probably the only right-winger in the world who's not bothered when I see Muslims praying 5 times a day. Amen. Anyone who acknowledges he's not God 5 times a day is not my enemy. That's how I personally feel, but it's not my religion. But it's actually not Islam or any other religion that makes these leaders angry. It's Christianity, it's the religion of Jesus that makes them angry. And that suggests that maybe there is something a little deeper going on here. It's not just that they're in the way. Christians are hardly in the way. They're the most peaceable people there are. They worship a God who tells them not to hurt other people, to turn the other cheek, to pray for their persecutors. So it's not like they're disruptive. They're the opposite of disruptive, and yet they are the enemy. So you should know this, I think. I don't know if there are any Christians here or people who are, interested in continuing to live in the country you grew up in, but these are the terms, and these are the stakes. They are not the ones that we've been told they are, left versus right, Republican versus Democrat. I learned that the hard way in the last couple of days, watching the leaders of the Republican Party, not all the leaders, but a lot of them, some of the most powerful and richest people in the party, reveal who they really are. And it made me think that for the purposes of this election, I mean, let's be honest, Trump just won. He won. Not only did he survive an assassination attempt, he stood up without knowing whether there were other shooters there. He stood up and faced the crowd and raised his hand and said, "Fight, fight, fight." That's it. You do that, you win. And by the way, I happen to notice that the crowd, which also didn't know whether there were other shooters, who watched Trump get shot in the face, they did not bolt. It wasn't like a fire in a theater, actually. They sat there, they watched him intently, and when he stood up, they applauded him, and many cried. Why is that? Because a brave leader gives his people heart. That's why. That's exactly why. So with that, Trump became president. I bet my house on it. And he defeated the Democrats. And on merit, by the way, not through the usual political scheming, "I'll trade you a Senate seat for your vote." No. He did it by being a man in a nation of people who weren't quite, just being honest, okay? He acted like a man, the kind of man I respect, and I think every person feels this way, every person, no matter what you think of Trump. Because leadership isn't actually all about, the way you talk. It's about how brave you are. That's what people want. They want a brave leader. So he won 4 months before the actual election. But it doesn't mean that he doesn't have enemies. And the truth, and no one wants to say it, but it is true, a lot of the enemies are people who claim to be his friends in the political party that I voted for my entire life. And they seek to subvert him. And they seek to channel the energy into a super dark direction. And above all, I'm just telling you, it's the last thing I'll say, and I'm sure this is very upsetting to everybody, but it's just, I just saw it. What do they care about? What do you want to know what they care about? They only care about war, that's it. That's what they care about. They don't care about immigration, obviously, at all. Our country's being colonized by the rest of the world, no problem. They don't care about the economy. They're insulated from it. They don't care. And they certainly don't care that Trump has a naughty mouth, said something, untoward off camera. They could care less. These are filthy people, right? Yeah, they're offended. No, they care about war. They want the power to kill. That's it. And that's the power, of course, everyone who wants to be God seeks to possess. That's why human sacrifice was the thing. I have the power to kill. Only God has the power over life and death. And that's the power they want. And Trump has stood in their way. Imperfectly, but Trump's the only president, since Jimmy Carter, most of my life, who hasn't committed us to a brand new war. That's what they hate about him. And that's what they were trying to change over the last couple of days. I saw it. That's all they cared about. And they lied about it, of course, and said all kinds of things are insane and totally untrue. But that was the motivator right there. And when Trump came out in 2016 and said the Iraq war was a mistake, which was very obvious to those of us who were in Iraq while it was going on, it was like news to nobody. It was shocking in Washington, and that was the point at which they sicked the FBI on him. They started bugging him. They decided we cannot have this guy because he was trying to limit their most important of all power, which is to hurt other people. And so you should just know this. That's what the stakes are. I think he's going to win. I think it's going to be really important to rolling back some of this insanity. But there are a lot of people who have other agendas, and you should just be aware of that. Thank you so much for letting me spoil your afternoon with that stuff.
Tucker, thanks for being here. Thanks for speaking the truth. And obviously, we have a lot that we can cover in a short amount of time. But let's start with a homework assignment.
Yes.
Based on what you just said, things have changed since Saturday. a lot of Americans in the center, and maybe even some Americans on the center left, saw that near tragedy, that near assassination of President Trump, and they realized, oh, maybe I've not quite figured out what's been going on. A lot of us have been in that category. You've talked about that yourself. We at Heritage have said that. What do you advise the people who are in this auditorium and also the people online to do with members of their family, friends, neighbor who still don't get it? What's the advice that you give us in having those conversations to bring them into this movement that Trump has built?
Well, I kind of feel at this point that first of all, anyone who thinks the status quo is a good idea is probably not convincible. If you let tens of millions of people into your country illegally, you destroy all your cities, you wreck the economy, you can't afford to go out to dinner, things aren't going well. And if you're willing to ignore that, then you're probably not someone I can persuade. So I would say that. Never give up on anyone, but probably best to just pray for those people instead of talk to them about politics. I really think the core problem in the country right now is bad leadership, and by bad I mean weak, and I think more broadly weak men are the problem. You watch these schools indoctrinate kids and try and turn them into freaks, circus freaks, and in the country that I grew up in, the dad would just punch the counselor out, put me in jail, I don't care. Like, you weirdo? I mean, that's like child molester stuff. Talking to my kids about sex without telling me? Where's dad? He should be beating this person, like physically. And I'm happy I just said I'm against violence, but that's like a very basic, that's the most basic requirement of fatherhood, but also of leadership more broadly, is to be willing to die for the people in your care, period. And if you're not willing to do that, you're contemptible. And what is that? What are we looking at when we acknowledge that? Well, we're looking at the fact, which is strength is the basic requirement of leadership. Weak leadership is an oxymoron. And with weak leaders, a nation dies, a family dies, a weak father will destroy a family. A weak officer will get his men killed, and a weak president will wreck his country. And that's exactly what we've seen. I mean, Biden's core problem is weakness. And what Trump displayed on Saturday was strength of the most basic kind that is absolutely impossible to fake. You can think whatever you want about Trump or whatever you've heard about Trump. You watch that tape, the guy is shot in the face and is bleeding, and forces the Secret Service to allow him to stand up and faces the crowd. I mean, all men, when they're boys, tell themselves, well, something happened, I would jump right in, and you know what I mean? Like, I'd stop the shooter. But you don't know that, actually, because you're not faced with it. I mean, very few people are tested in the way Trump was tested on Saturday, and not only did he pass, he got the highest score ever recorded. And so you can't look at that, and it's not fakeable. That's just real. It's undeniably real. No one staged that. And so anyone who looks at that video, I think, comes away thinking that person has to lead the country because the option is more destruction. That's what I think. Just watch the video.
During your comment there and also your comment from the podium, it occurred to me that C.S. Lewis's great phrase, men without chests, is really apropos here. And not to go, too intellectual or academic here, although remember, I do lead a think tank. It seems as if, yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree. It seems as if Americans are saying Washington elites, New York elites, all of these elites have complicated life. And what Trump showed us in that moment of near tragedy, as you said, is just something basic. And what we're all yearning for is just a return to normal. And it is normal for a strong man, for a man, period, to respond the way you described to the school counselor, with all this disorder. It's normal, although very, very heroic on a tremendous scale for President Trump to have responded the way he did. But it shows how starved this country is for just normal things. What's your prediction for themes this week at the RNC from a messaging expert who's got his pulse on things? What should the campaign really focus on, not just for President Trump and Mr. Vance, but for people out here in the audience and digitally who are going to be involved in local campaigns? What do we need to be emphasizing rhetorically?
Well, I mean, I think, can I say one thing really quick, which is the definition of strength, I think, needs to be a little more precise. Strength is not abusive behavior or authoritarian behavior. That's what weak people do. That's what Gretchen Whitmer did during COVID in the neighboring state of Michigan. This is a demonstrably weak person with a facelift who's like terrified to go out in public, and yet she's telling people they can't buy paint in a paint store. That's not strength, that's fragility. She is fragile and brittle, and that's why she's acting that way. True strength is calm. That's the first thing about strength. Someone who's actually strong is in command, doesn't need to prove it, because people can smell it. The second thing about strength is it serves others. I mean, willingness to die for the people you lead is a prerequisite, okay? I'm not afraid. I'm willing to lay down my life for you, okay? That's clearly the message of strength. It's what Trump displayed on Saturday, and people's reaction to it is amazing. They instantly calm down. Dad's home. Everything is okay. It's received on a visceral level. So to the extent that the campaign, and I'm not a messaging person, obviously, I'm like half insane and can't stop talking, so I'm not good at messaging, but to the extent that they can convey that, you know, it's fine, actually. And I do think the campaign is trying to say that in its unity message. And a lot of people hear unity and they think, well, unity implies some sort of compromise, conversation. You can't have a conversation with people who are unwilling to compromise. The left, which is a religious movement, is unwilling to compromise on any level at all. They won't even admit men can't become women. So how can you have unity with people like that? And of course you can't. But I think what they're really trying to say is, let's ignore some of the insanity, actually. Be in charge. You don't need to constantly remind people you're in charge. Just do it. I mean, a good father's not constantly telling you how hard he works to, you know, pay for the food you're eating. He just does it. And you notice after a while, and you're calmed by that. And I think maybe that's the message. We don't need to respond to all this nonsense. You're too small to respond to. That's what I would do. No one wants to hear, like, why is MSNBC still on the air? Nobody watches it. Same with CNN. Nobody watches it. And if I look back on my life, I've worked at both CNN and MSNBC. So for me, it's, you know, the hatred is absolutely real. But too much, though. Too much. Unhelpfully. Don't feel hatred. That itself is a sign of weakness, in my opinion, and a lack of self-discipline. But why are we even talking about them? Nobody watches. Nobody watches. I mean, my nephew get drunk and post something on X, and he's got more viewers than MSNBC primetime. I'm serious. So, like, why are we even giving them oxygen by engaging with them? Their audience is tiny. I hope that's part of what they're saying. I saw Don Jr., who is really my favorite person in Trump world, who really I think does understand, I shouldn't even be saying this, but it's true, understands the voters and how they feel on a real level, on a gut level. But I saw him do an interview with MSNBC today, and they're like, you know, are you going to separate more families at the border? Really? You let in tens of millions of illegal aliens and wreck our country, and that's your concern? And he just looked at the guy, he's like, yeah, go away. Like, enough. He didn't yell at him, just go away. I mean, it's not even worth it, actually. And I think that posture is kind of what's needed right now. I'm not going to engage with you. I've tried for 7 years now, 8 years, to have a conversation in good faith. I used to try to book these people on my show. Not one person would come on my show to debate the other side. And then, of course, I got fired anyway. But it's like it's better just to be, like, calm and in command. And I think that restores tranquility to the country faster than any rhetorical argument you could make.
So that's high-profile national example, which is great. And I also want to give some folks an idea of what they might be able to do locally. And it seems as if you're saying, whomever you are, national profile, don't engage with these outlets that are dying, don't give them the oxygen, that there's also a lesson there about what we might do at the local level. What I hear most of all as I'm traveling the country from people like in this audience, I know you do as well, is, Kevin, what advice do you have for me talking to my local school board, talking to my local city council? They, of course, want to cancel us, but at some point, people are going to those meetings, especially school board meetings, because they are invested in it with their own kids and grandkids. What's your advice for them? Because and I think you know this, but our rationale at Heritage in asking that question is, we want this to be not just about DC and New York power centers. We want Americans after Saturday's tragedy to understand this is also about what we're doing in our lives on a daily and weekly basis, and to give people that advice about how to expand the ranks of this movement locally.
Well, I think Saturday is the inspirational moment to do that. And what's the lesson of Saturday? I mean, there are probably many lessons. One is, like, if a guy 150 feet away at a political rally climbs a ladder with a rifle, you know, maybe this whole system is not quite what we were told it is. Okay, sorry. So there's that. But the big picture takeaway is bravery is the essential quality. It's the essential quality. What's the takeaway from Saturday? Trump's going to be president because he's brave. Period. Period. Like, actually brave. Physically brave. Like, facing death. Shot in the face. And unbowed. Unafraid. Defiant. And that's the only thing that works. And I do think there's been so much whispering among the persecuted right about, wow, you know, does this come to a time when we have to, like, physically fight back? And I don't think it takes that. It doesn't. You don't have to hurt anyone to save your country. You have to be willing to be hurt, however, period. You have to be willing to make a sacrifice. You do. And I think people are cowards. I'm just saying that. Sorry. No one in particular. There are an awful lot of cowards, me sometimes too. But Trump is a reminder that doesn't work. The only thing that works is bravery. So if you walk into a school board meeting, the first thing they do is seize the moral high ground unjustly. These are the people who have the least claim on the moral high ground. They're amoral. They're filthy, actually. They're sexualizing your children. They should be in prison. But somehow they manage through rhetorical tricks to make you feel like you're the freak because you want them to get their tentacles off your kids. And you've already lost if you allow that. And so the way to approach them, I mean, it's a matter of employing words, but moral force. You will not do that. I will not accept that. Under no circumstance. I will do everything I can, as long as I draw breath, to stop you from doing that to my children. You have no right. What you're doing is totally immoral. It's criminal, and I will stop you, period. You don't need to scream. And I think to say, when people approach you and say, well, if you're against this, you're a racist, or if you're against that, you're a whatever, they call you names, someone who's been called a few names, I can promise you that not one person calling you names believes that you are those things or even cares. In fact, they're almost always those things themselves. It's purely a leash around your neck designed to control you. It's a manipulation device. Everyone here knows that already. We've been going through this for many years. And so if you're still worrying about it, then that's on you. Like, I don't care what you call me, actually. I also don't care if you put me in jail. I really don't. I mean, Gandhi, I have mixed feelings about Gandhi, but he did end the Raj after he kicked the British out of India after 300 years. And all he did was talk and just stand there and be obstreperous in a peaceful way. And that worked. I mean, it's a little more complicated than that, but that's kind of fundamentally what happened. One guy was like, no. As Solzhenitsyn famously said, to bring down a tyranny, it takes one man who will tell the truth. That's it. And so I think it is as simple as that. I really do believe that. I know that sounds childlike, but it's demonstrable in history, and it's clearly true now. You don't need to, I would definitely not give up your guns ever under any circumstance. And they're going to try and make you do, the real lesson of the shooting is you shouldn't be able to defend yourself. I don't think it is. The real lesson is you're dangerous, and you can't have power, actually. Because you caused this, as we all know. So, but the point is, don't let them seize the moral high ground. Stay calm, stay assured in your spirit that you are right, and be willing to make an actual sacrifice on behalf of your family and your country. And if you're not willing, well, then the country's going to go to them, and they're going to eat you. That's just true.
One of the other lessons, I think, too, is how disordered the left is regarding the centrality of politics. I mean, you even said it here a few moments ago that politics, in essence, is religion for them. And it seems to me that we, not just we on the right, but just we, period, as Americans, whatever our political ideology may be, ought to reject that concept and understand that there are things so much more important than politics. In other words, to be engaged in that kind of framework with the left, we're always going to lose. Are often going to lose. I've heard you talk about living the good life, and I've reflected on that since Saturday night, from that moment as I was standing with my 14-year-old daughter who was sobbing because we thought the absolute worst when we first saw the news, as I'm sure everyone did. But then I realized, here's a moment, in addition to the politics and the policy, which are important, where we've really got to get back to, especially us here, to living the good life. What advice do you have for us for keeping this in perspective?
Thank you. I mean, I think about this every day. I mean, one of the lies about living in a certain way is that you have to be rich. And it's hard for me to say because I made a lot more money than I ever thought I would. So it's like, oh, yeah, rich guy lecturing us about, how to live. But if you saw how I actually lived, I think you'd see it could be done pretty cheaply. I'm not into spending money. No, I mean, for me, the good life is a life that's rooted in physical reality, actually. I think one of the main problems with the modern world is how abstract, which is to say digital, everything is. And I find it essential to maintaining happiness and clarity and perspective to get away from that. My rule is if I can't smell it, it's not really real. And I believe that. I really do. I sniff everything and everybody in my... I'm not joking at all.
You sound like Joe Biden.
I mean it. I defended his hair sniffing because I do the same, and I'm not ashamed of it. But I'm not a weirdo or a creep. I didn't shower with my daughter, so it's cool when I think it's defensible when I do. But the point is, don't spend your life in a fake world. Spend your life with other people who you can touch and smell and whose eyes you can see. I think animals are incredibly important. I really believe that. The older I get, I think it's really important. God created animals. We have dominion over them. It doesn't mean that they're totally different from us. They're not. And there's something about animals that brings us back to reality. I could never live without dogs. We have a lot of dogs. I think it's very important. It's not just like, oh, it's my pet. It's like, no. It's an expression of God's creation of beauty, and I think nature and trees are just essential. I could not live without them. I don't understand how people can live in glass cubes on the 27th floor in Midtown. I think it's terrible for you. I think it's wrong that we would encourage that, and I don't think a lot of the things that are described as progress are progress at all. I think that they are imprisonment, and I think technology is a mixed blessing at best. I really do. I feel I have very extreme views on this, which I'm not going to share with you because I don't want to reveal how crankish and crazy I really am on this subject. But we accept technological progress as progress when it's enslavement, actually. And that's super obvious. No one does anything about it ever. You hear people say in like think tank world or cable TV news world, oh, yeah, we're spending too much time on our phones. It's like, no, actually, we really are. And it's destroying our souls and making us crazy and unhappy and dividing us, most importantly, from one another. So, take affirmative, very aggressive, like don't allow a cell phone in your bedroom, you weirdo. What? No. Don't allow it in the bedroom. I wouldn't allow, a circus elephant in my bedroom. Too disruptive. Don't allow an iPhone. Just like, how's that? So for at least 8 hours a day, I don't have that. There are other activities that the bedroom was designed for. And... your phone, or whatever. Anyway, take that seriously, I think, and get outside. And if you're not married, just grab someone off the street and do it. It's not that hard. I mean it. I half mean that, actually. It's not. I don't think it's that. It's never been hard for me.
This is the danger of asking you an open-ended question.
I know, because as I said, luckily I begin all comments with the caveat I am half insane, which is demonstrable.
Last question, a little open-ended. It's January 2029. President Trump is giving his farewell address. We tend to, on the political right, think in worst-case scenario terms, but we at Heritage, as you know, try to get people to think in best-case scenario terms. What's the best-case scenario for the message regarding what he's accomplished, but also, more importantly, where the country's going?
Well, by far the most important question is, does the country hold together? And the country can only hold together if there is a consensus view, not a universal view, but a consensus view, a majority view, on what it is to be an American. It's not a racial group. It's not a linguistic designation. The population of the country has changed so radically in such a short period that it risks breaking apart because not enough people have enough in common with one another. That would be a tragedy. That would never end well, despite the fantasies you read on Twitter about how that's not going to happen without massive bloodshed. You don't want that to happen, period. So you want the country to hold together, but it can only hold together if most people understand that they are Americans because why? What do they have in common? It can't just be competing groups who are trying to screw the other ones out of some prize, some money that other people made. That's very quickly where we're going. And so above all, after avoiding nuclear war, which has got to be the first one, and only Trump will do that, and J.D. Vance, everyone else was like totally into nuclear war. All the other people he was considering, let's have a nuclear war. Okay. Children. Anyway, so after that, the most important long-term question is, what do we all have in common? And only a leader can establish that. It doesn't need to be explicit, by the way. I don't think Trump's going to give a speech when he's president saying, here are the 5 things we require of every American or every American must believe. It's not quite that simple, but there has to evolve a sense of what we have in common, of what we share. Because we don't look alike, we don't speak the same language oftentimes, we don't have the same religion, so what is it we have in common? That has to be the overriding goal above all others. And the last thing I'll say is I think the big change in the last week is the social sanction levied against people for supporting Trump is disappearing fast. It is. One of the reasons this was such a divided country is that people were not allowed, like normal white-collar professionals, were not allowed to even consider the possibility that Trump might be less than Hitler. And now I think they can. I do. I think after Saturday, that is the big change. People are like, maybe I didn't like Trump, I didn't vote for him the first time, but all of a sudden I'm seeing, I don't know, Elon Musk just endorsed him. I think the country's largest government contractor, a guy with an awful lot to lose. If there was anyone with a lot to lose, yeah, he's the richest guy in the world. Okay, he's also got the most to lose in the world. And that guy just endorsed Trump publicly about 5 minutes after the shooting. That is a watershed, in my opinion. Bill Ackman, someone I don't agree with on a lot of things. Bill Ackman, also a lot to lose. Someone who's, I doubt, ever voted for a Republican. Those are signals to the rest of the country. Again, these are not people I necessarily agree with on the issues at all. However, what those gestures signal to everyone else, it's like, well, I guess I could do that if I wanted to also. That is a prerequisite for national healing and for national unity. Doesn't mean you have to agree with someone. In other words, if somebody said to me 4 years ago, like, you're not allowed to support Joe Biden. Well, I never supported Joe Biden. I don't agree with him on anything. I didn't yet hate Joe Biden. I now do. I'm ashamed to say I actually hate Joe Biden. But I don't want to feel that way, but I do. I do because he's wrecking my country. My kids live here. But if someone said to me 4 years ago, you're not allowed to support Joe Biden, I would say that's a bad thing. You should be allowed to support any candidate you want. This is a free society. It's a free country. It's a free country, a phrase that was common in my youth and now extinct. But it is still a free country. It must remain a free country. And in order for that to happen, you have to have the right as the average person to support anyone you want. And I do think you now have the right to support Trump. And that's the beginning of healing for us.
Tucker, thanks for being here. Thanks for everything you do. On behalf of everyone here, and I know millions of Americans, we're grateful for your clarity and matching that with an unfailing sense of humor. God bless you, my friend.
Kevin, God bless you. Thank you.
Tucker, thank you. Dr. Roberts, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here so much of today and being a part of this. Will you please give our special events team at Heritage a big applause for all the bringing this together? They were awesome. All right, please make your way out. There is lots of good food and drink. We hope you'll stick around and enjoy that with us, and we'd love to mingle and talk. So enjoy the evening, enjoy the week, and have a great 2024. Thanks, everybody.